Alrighty, here we go. And just let me know whenever you're ready for me to move to the next slide, Crystal.
Thank you. Alrighty. Well, good evening, members of City Council. My name is Crystal Dukes, and I work in the Community Relations Division. Today, I'm accompanied by Cultivando executives, Olga Gonzalez and Rocio Franco from Cultivando. And today, we'd like to provide you with an update on the Latino Engagement Task Force. Next slide. Thank you. Just as a quick overview, LET is a city initiative that started in December 2015 to really assist Commerce City in building a stronger and more inclusive Latino community. Cultivando, a local nonprofit, was contracted by the city then to develop, support, and facilitate LET. To date, there has been 3 cohorts. We just started the 3rd cohort about 2 weeks ago. Next slide. Some of the key objectives include documenting real and perceived barriers to participation of the Latino community with the city, and also identifying policy opportunities to help increase access and participation of the Latino community in city services, programs, events, etc. And of course, we want to continue maintaining positive relationships with former LET participants. Next slide, please. LET is composed of 10 to 12 Latino Commerce City community members that are mono or bilingual Spanish speakers. Cultivando identifies the participants through a screening process. There's 8 90-minute virtual monthly meetings, and meetings are conducted in Spanish. Of course, we do provide translation and interpretation services if and when needed. And I serve as a city liaison to this committee or to this project. Next slide. So really my key role here is to provide feedback for meetings to city staff and answer any city related questions from participants during the meetings. Cultivando staff will be providing a report at the end of cohort 3, and then we will present it to council in July 2021. And that particular report will include recommendations to city council from participants. And city management will review those recommendations and work with the task force and with the city council to continue implementation of strategies and provide timeframes. Next slide. Next, I'll hand it over to Olga Gonzalez. She will present on previous LET outcomes. Olga.
Yes, good evening, everyone. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay. Thank you for allowing us to come and talk about some of the work that we've been doing in support of LET. We go into the next slide, please. So just reviewing some of the outcomes that came out from the first cohort. So the city was able to hire more bilingual and bicultural staff to work for the city, such as front desk. We know that the police department hired at least 10 bilingual police officers, and this came about as a direct ask from some of the LET members just to improve relationships and communication. The police department created a policy and trains its officers not to ask immigration status except for a person who commits a felony, which was a great fear for some members of our community. And so with that fear, it could potentially put more of us at risk if they're not reporting crimes or things that are suspicious. The city executed 2 telephone town halls completely in Spanish, which was great. It was able to reach more people. And also City Council passed a proclamation in December of 2016, supporting Commerce City as an inclusive city and welcoming all community members regardless of race, country of origin, or other factors. Next. And then the second cohort continued on some of these good efforts to improve language access in the city, such as bilingual signage at city facilities, in-person pilot program for interpretation at city council meetings, continued engagement and communication between Commerce City and the Latino community. There was a collaboration with the Spanish media at events such as Movies in the Park, as well as press releases in Spanish. There was a co-development of park and community safety strategies with community members, police departments, and parks and rec staff, such as Healthy Places efforts and ongoing meetings with the police department. Next slide. And then wanted to pass it over to Rocio Franco, our Associate Director, to talk about some of the current work that the LET cohort is doing.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for having us. My name is Rocio Franco, and I'm the Associate Director for Cultivando. We currently started to have LET number 3, or in this case, cohort number 3. And we'll be meeting for the following 8 months, except for December. And the reason we decided to do that is just to respect holidays during that time and season. The first time that we met for LET, it was in October 16th. We have 15 community members as a part of the cohort. And the purpose for the first meeting is to, greet each other and getting to know each other and identify those topics of interest. As we develop these meetings, also we will give that opportunity to bring more topics to the table and have that space for more conversations around it too. Next slide, please. Some of the topics of interest that were identified during our meeting is understanding city processes, programs, and services. A lot of these community members, they don't have that relationship with the city yet, but they're very interested about that, and then also understand how the city works, but also how the city provides these services in order for them to access to them. Also, active adult services in Spanish was brought up. Also, we want to build that relationship with older community members as well, how to keep the city clean with neighborhood services, additional family events. They would like to see something around maybe Halloween, Christmas, holidays, stuff like that. Also, the police, Commerce City Police Department updates on crimes, and also how the community members can also help and be the eye in the community. How the city is handling homelessness, and then if they're, having any effort with the county as well. Youth programs with the city, especially our teenagers. Explore new communication tools also to build that relationship as well. The relationship between the city and the school districts and how they supporting the districts as well. And street sweeping and road maintenance as well. Crystal, would you like to take on?
Yes, thank you, Rocio. So at this time, we'd like to answer any questions from City Council.
Any questions from council regarding this presentation? Councilwoman Noble.
Councilmember Noble, I believe you're on mute still.
You're right. I was. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the presentation. It's really great that this program has been going on for 3 years, and I appreciate the efforts of the previous council and the members who were on this council who participated in it. That's really wonderful. Can you tell me where the members come from? Is there some sort of application process, or is it announced? How do you find the cohort members?
That's a great question. So Cultivando has a screening process. I'll let Rocio answer that question.
Sure, thank you, Crystal. Yes, we go through a process of application and then also interviewing community members to kind of identify their interest, and then also the experience that they probably have around the community and the involvement. And that's how we identify these community members to be part of the cohort.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none, we'll move on to the next presentation. Thank you very much for your time this evening.
Thank you.
Our next presentation is the South Platte Crossing Facility Condition Assessment Review. Will John Borgeleli, Management Analyst, please make the presentation?
Good evening, Mayor, Honorable Council. Dylan, are you going to have the slides pulled up or should I pull those up?
Nope, I can grab it. Just give me one moment, please.
All right. Well, as he's getting that pulled up, I'll just kind of start teeing this up. This is a review of the facility condition assessment for the South Platte Crossing building. Council had previously, slide please. Next slide. Yeah, there. So some context on this building. This is the building located at 7190 Colorado Boulevard. It's also known as the Adams Tower South Platte Crossing. During the 2018 retreat, Council had first identified this space as a priority for developing emergency or human services for residents and instructed staff at that time to begin looking into acquiring a floor within this building. It's structured as a condominium. So we are looking to acquire one floor in this building. In October of 2018, Council in an executive session officially gave staff direction to pursue a deal and sign a letter of interest. That letter of interest was signed at the beginning of this year in January with the Urban Land Conservancy following initial negotiations. And in July of this year, Council approved the purchase and sale agreement with the Urban Land Conservancy. Next slide, please. So as part of our due diligence during this process, we contracted McKinstry, who's also we've worked with before on similar assessments, to conduct an assessment of the building and particularly of the unit of which we're looking to purchase. That assessment was completed on October 7th, and the report generated from that was attached to the packet this evening. The inspection objection deadline is November 9th, which is why we're coming to you tonight as we review what we found in the facilities condition assessment. If these costs are looking too great, in addition to the $1 million purchase price, we would have to receive that direction before that objection deadline in order to pull out of the purchase and sale agreement. Next slide, please. So a little bit of a property overview. This is the 5th floor of 6. It's unit 6 of 6th floor building of South Platte Crossing at 7190 Colorado Boulevard. It's approximately 10,800 square feet at a $1 million price is what was negotiated in the purchase and sale agreement. It will have multiple tenants, so the county will retain the basement and floors 1 and 2. And the Urban Land Conservancy, a nonprofit, is working with Adams County to sell floors 3 through 6 of the building. And we are looking to purchase the 5th floor unit. Next slide, please. Floor plan, as you can see here, it's a lot of office space, a lot of wide open area for cubicles and then offices. Along the perimeter, there are bathrooms on the unit, elevator, break space, kitchenette, fairly standard. Next slide, please. So a summary of what we found in the facility condition assessment. The building, which was constructed in 1980, is in good condition consistent with its age. We are looking, bottom line up front, at about $867,388 in maintenance costs over the next 10 years. Now, as this building will be administered by an HOA, a COA, responsibility for items specific to our unit are entirely at the cost of the city. Building-wide improvements are prorated by floor space. So prorated costs have been provided in this presentation for any common elements in the building. So heating and cooling systems will need to be replaced fairly soon. All of the costs you see associated with those are at the prorate already. So short term, within when we take occupancy November 24th, if we choose to go forward, within the first 3 years, we'll be looking at approximately $303,276 in costs. Midterm, 3 to 5 years, an additional $205,096. And long-term, that 5 to 10 year mark will be an additional about $360,000. So over the first 10 years of occupancy in the building, total capital costs, in addition to that $1 million purchase price, will be about $867,388. The next couple slides break down exactly what those items are that were determined in the FCA. Next slide, please, Dylan. So the immediate items are within the first 3 items. The biggest is the air distribution unit, which is currently in very poor / abandoned condition, as the report says. That will need to be replaced. There are approximately 100 units on the unit we're looking at alone that will need to be replaced at over $100,000 cost. Additionally, the building automation system is expected to be obsolete within the next 3 years. Those are some of the the cost that we'd be looking at immediately, the bigger items. And as you can see, there are a bevy of other smaller items within the first 3 years. Next slide, please. Years 3 to 5, the biggest item here would be replacing the heating water baseboard units. These are also in very poor condition. This is the sole source of heat for the unit. And again, this cost is solely the cost for the replacement for the 5th floor unit. Next slide, please, Dylan. And then out to the year 10 replacements. This is just a lot of smaller items, the interior lighting, and then just a host of smaller items that will need to be replaced. This is an older building. A lot of these units or a lot of these systems are reaching the end of their lifespan and will need to be replaced. Next slide, Dylan. So at this time, if council has any feedback or questions, I will be happy to answer those. If council wishes to proceed with the purchase of this unit, then no action is required. We have signed that PSA and we're moving forward on that front. If council wishes to exercise its option to not purchase the building, that would require council action and direction to staff in order to withdraw from the deal. Currently, we've paid $25,000 in earnest money that's fully refundable should we exercise that option to back out of the deal. And the total price of the FCA was $7,500. So at this time, if council has any questions or any direction.
Councilwoman Ellen Thomas.
Yes, thank you for presenting tonight. Have a few questions I wanted to ask. Has staff identified what the emergency human services would be? And can you give like examples of, I know at one previous presentation you said to assist with the homeless population, but can you tell me some of the other candidates?
At this time, staff doesn't really have any candidates for use in the building. That's something that would be a council decision. We have looked at potentially either using it as an incubator space for nonprofits, potentially moving city services into the space, but so far from council direction, we have not received a clear direction of what the intended use for the space would be.
Okay, thank you. Okay. And then for the immediate repairs, is the city going to have to pay them since the other floors are empty?
So it's all prorated by floor space. So that would be the share that the city would bear. The floors that aren't currently occupied would be paid for by the current owner of those floors. So the Urban Land Conservancy for floors 3 and 6, Adams County for the share for the basement through 2nd floor unit.
Okay, all right.
So all the numbers presented in there are the prorated numbers. So that's only the city's burden for those amounts.
Okay. Okay. And then, so I know you just said it's up to possibly council to decide, but once staff and council decides who gets to move on the 5th floor, are we going to charge rent for the upkeep, and are they going to help pay whoever gets the floor, and then will they have to pay part of the prorated cost as well?
That would be conditioned to any lease agreement. If we were to let this space out to nonprofits as an incubator space and not to use it for city services, that would be subject to however that lease is negotiated. Mr. Sheasley, if I'm saying anything egregiously wrong, please stop me.
I will just affirmatively say you're not saying anything egregiously wrong.
Thank you.
That would be negotiated between the parties, and maybe a benefit that the city would give to a nonprofit would be to not charge that, is typically how it. Previous councils have worked on city-owned space that is used for nonprofit purposes.
Okay, great. So and then one last question. So if it's a nonprofit, will the city pay the HOA costs, or who has to pay the HOA costs?
The city as the owner of the unit would be paying the COA dues. If condition, again, for that lease that we would negotiate with any potential tenants of the space, that's money we seek to recoup through the lease. That would be at our discretion during negotiations or not, depending if that's a benefit that we'd want to provide to those nonprofits.
Okay. All right, thank you. That's all I have.
Yes, ma'am.
Councilman Hurst.
Thank you. Appreciate the detail you guys went into. So questions are changing a little bit on the fly because the presentation last night that I read had 400K. So
Yeah, I received some information from our contractor after close of business.
No.
And had to update that.
No, and I see the level of detail, so I appreciate that. But I had some questions based around what, $40,000 a year on average looks like in comparative to the other assets that we manage as a city. Obviously, that's broke down into an average cost with the 400K. So if we did that here, $80,000 a year, what is that incredibly more to maintain, or incredibly more than we would expect from a similar asset that we have around the city? I just don't know what we're paying to maintain other buildings, and if this is a reasonable cost, or if this is a really bad investment for us. I guess one of the pieces that I'd be asking from you guys is, considering everything, do we have the staff appropriate to take this asset on? There's a couple questions that I know probably fall in line with what Councilwoman Allen Thomas was asking. They'd probably be resolved during a lease agreement if there was anybody else out. But have we considered cost of changing the layout to make it more efficient of use? Right now the layout is pretty open, but if you brought in 6 or 7 nonprofits and you charged half market rent, is that sustainable or something like that? I like the idea because of the location. I think the building location and kind of our vision for the light rail station is what drove us to this discussion, to happen in the first place. So we can't forget that the value that we originally saw was in the location. And so we're going to have to eat some cost, obviously. But really what I'm looking for is, can we take this on as a city? Is it, what's reasonable in terms of cost to expect for this compared to the other buildings that we have in our city? And, what value can we create by new design of the interior as well?
Those are great questions. I don't have an answer on current maintenance per square footage, how this capital costs would stack up against other city properties, but I will get you that information.
Wow. Oh, I'm sorry. The whole time I thought my video was on. I appreciate that. I think it's just good perspective for us to have, because it does sound expensive when you make it 800,000 over the next 10 years. And I understand, having the building up to a standard that we would all expect is definitely the goal as well. But at the same time, can we see, how much it costs to have, how much should we pay in maintenance at the Civic Center? I hope it's considerably more, in comparison, but because it's a larger building, more space to use. But it'd just be good to know kind of per square footage and by use, how we pay for other buildings, because this could be right in line with the normal, building costs, and it's not as expensive as we're looking at it here. And just that perspective for me would help me a lot in the decision making.
Councilwoman Noble.
So John, apparently there was nothing wrong with the elevator. I had heard even this summer one of the elevators wasn't working.
The elevators are working. One of the loading dock elevators will need to be replaced, but the internal elevators that service the whole of the building are working.
Okay, and then if the other floors aren't taken, when would the repairs actually occur for the entire building to make it usable?
That's something that the current management company has laid out in their reserve study. That's something that I can provide. Most of these, even though these floors aren't currently occupied, they are owned. The Urban Land Conservancy owns floors 3 through 6, and they're responsible for the upkeep of those. There is still a COA board. It just has currently fewer members as there are fewer different owners. So a lot of these, they are actively maintaining the building. I think some of these items are currently in the process of being bid out, and they're working on or are scheduled per their reserve study.
Okay, that's
which
great.
Can be made available if council wishes.
All right, that's great. And I don't know if I've mentioned this before, but the Brighton City Hall on 4th Street is the exact same building. They went to a great deal of expense to rehab the building and make it usable for their city hall. So it might be useful to just make a quick call over to Brighton City Hall to see what kind of expenses are in these buildings. There's actually maybe 4 or 5 of the same exact building throughout this region. And then my final thought about it, other than the fact it is a good location, as Councilmember Hurst was talking about, other than the gravel pit across the street, which makes it very difficult getting in and out of the building when there's a big dust storm. But what are the issues we're looking at in terms of just in terms of analysis of the future, John, with regards to people working remotely and not actually coming to spaces? What does the future look like for 6-story buildings that people get in an elevator and go into a place with no windows that open?
That is a very good question. That is not something I'm qualified to answer, unfortunately. I think that is something to take into consideration when looking at purchasing this floor. It is a very good space, but it is also physical space. And with much of city staff and many other organizations working remote for the past 7 months, consideration should be paid to whether or not council sees physical infrastructure or physical spaces like this as a worthwhile investment.
Yeah, true enough. Thank you.
Councilman Guardiola.
Thank you, Mayor. And this doesn't include any restructuring or building, if we have to put cubicles, walls in there, any of that to make it a usable space.
No, sir, this is just to fix the current deficiencies within the space as is and within the building as scheduled. Any sort of restructuring, if we'd want to put in interior walls, cubicles, there is some office furniture in some of the areas, but currently the cubicle spaces are just completely empty. So this does not include any cost that it would take to refit the space. That wasn't something that we prepared, just since we don't know how we are envisioning use of the space, then didn't feel it a worthwhile endeavor to draw up proposals for that.
Okay, thank you.
Councilwoman Noble.
I think though there's probably a standard something per square footage on remodeling office space. So maybe we could work off of that just on the standard. But otherwise, I would agree with Councilmember Hurst in that I would like to see a comparison as to whether these maintenance costs over the next 10 years are in line or are higher or otherwise, because do we have a real estate person on staff?
Do not have a real estate person on staff.
Do we work with a real estate person as a consultant at all? Like commercial real estate or anything who we obtain information from?
That would be.
Let me jump in. No, we do not.
Maybe we could, it would be worthwhile to have a conversation with someone who has expertise in this area also to help out.
Any other questions for staff regarding this presentation? Does council wish to give a direction other than what has already been provided to staff regarding this item? Councilman Hurst.
Just real quick, I did a quick Google search. It says on average $200 per square foot for remodel of office space. I'd probably say 250 just to be safe, but just an idea for everybody. That's what Google just told me.
Mr. Sheasley.
Thank you, Mayor. John, correct me if I'm saying anything correct. John's been doing a great job handling this diligence period with assistance from outside counsel. But Next Monday is a deadline to get an extension for the inspection objections for 30 days.
That's correct.
I don't quite know exactly how that works. If it pushes the closing date as well, we would have to deposit an additional $5,000 in earnest funds, but we have to make that decision before the council meeting next Monday. Otherwise, the deadline is November 9th. So that means council would have to give direction no later than next Monday, November 2, unless we do extend that. So whatever direction you give tonight, if you think that this question may go on, council may not have direction by next Monday, I would recommend that staff extend that deadline.
Does the council wish to give direction to staff regarding this item? Councilwoman Allen Thomas.
Yes, thank you. I would just like to ask for an extension till we get a little more information. You know, there's so many other little questions I think that as a council we're not sure of. So, I mean, that's how I feel, a possible extension.
Councilman Hurst.
Yeah, I support requesting that extension, and I think you guys did a great job with, you know, getting the feedback that you did. But it definitely spurs some follow-up questions, I think, from that we heard, that if we can address those, even if we can address most of those, and maybe not all of them, but as many as we can, I think it's a significant purchase, and it's not just because $1 million we have that budgeted, but, you know, hearing those additional needs are important because we want to have a quality building if we're going to put it out there for the community. But I think there are some interesting questions about what use we can get if we can recover any of that revenue, you know, how much it's going to cost to kind of re-envision the layout to get more out of it. So just if we can answer a couple of those, I would definitely support the extension, which should help us, give us some time for those discussions to happen.
Councilman Guardiola.
Yeah, I would echo Councilman Hurst and Councilwoman Allen Thomas. I would like to go for the extension to get more information.
Is anyone else on council? Councilwoman Noble.
Extension sounds like a good idea. Yes.
Anybody else on council wish to seek the extension? Councilwoman Grimes.
First, just wanted to say apologies for my tardiness. I was caught at a meeting at work, but I would also support the extension like the rest of council has said.
Mr. Tinklenberg, you have your direction.
Thank you, sir.
Next on the agenda is a Suncor presentation. Will Jason Rogers, Director of Community Development, please make the presentation?
Thank you, Mayor and Mayor Pro Tem and City Council. Thank you for being here tonight. Back at the September 21st regular meeting, staff had made its presentation on the oil and gas monthly update. As such, that meeting was also joined with us by Suncor in presenting an update to council on a number of outstanding matters and questions that were raised in the previous months with respect to operations, sustainability, maintenance, upkeep, and just general welfare and safety. To that, today and at that meeting, was supported by council to bring forward a study session item with representation by Suncor. In addition to that, we also have representation from CDPHE to be able to answer any questions that may be in particular to its review of Suncor's operations and or partnership therewith in addressing those matters and or issues. So therefore tonight we have Mr. Donald Austin, VP of the refinery here in Commerce City, to make a presentation. He also has his team with him with respect to those various operations. And as I noted, we also have various members from the environmental program at CDPHE also on the line to provide response and/or additional information. With that, I will turn it over to Mr. Donald Austin to introduce his team and to take the presentation away.
Thank you. First of all, thank you, Mayor, and thank you, honourable council members, on this opportunity tonight. Just before we start, I'd like to introduce my leadership team who are going to assist in this presentation. So if I can just go through them and just ask them to put their cameras on so you can put a name and a face together. I'll start with Heather Saskoff, who is our Director of Operations here at the refinery.
Hi, everyone. Heather here. You can hear me? So I'm the Operations Director here at the Commerce City Refinery. I lead a team of about 230 of our personnel at the refinery, have about 21 years of operating experience with Suncor across a couple of our different assets. And have had a number of different technical and operational as well as functional roles in the industry. I do live locally here. I live in the Northfield area, just across Dick's Sporting Center from your City Hall as well, and spend much of my family's time both at Pioneer Park and Paradise Island, as well as the parks and playgrounds in the local area as well. So spend a lot of time at the refinery, but also locally here as well.
Thank you, Heather. Maybe if I could next ask Brian Nelson to introduce himself. Brian is our Health and Safety Manager here at the refinery.
Thank you, Donald. As Donald said, I'm Brian Nelson. I'm the Environmental Health and Safety Manager for Suncor's Commerce City Refinery. Been with Suncor since 2006 here at the refinery, and I am a local Commerce City resident.
Thank you, Brian. We maybe ask Christina Henderson, if Christina could introduce herself. Christina is our Director of Maintenance and Reliability.
Good evening, I'm Christina Henderson. As Donald stated, I'm the Director of Maintenance and Reliability. I've been associated with the refinery since about 1999, so I've had a number of years with the refinery here itself and with Suncor. I have been in this position just over a year and a half with this particular position with the refinery. I'm not a Commerce City resident, but I am local to Colorado, and my husband also works here at the refinery. We actually met here a number of years ago and have two young daughters that we are raising together.
Thank you. Thanks, Christina. Maybe if I could just get April Maestas to introduce herself. April is our Director of Engineering.
Good evening. My name is April Maestas. I'm Director of Engineering at the Commerce City Refinery. Started working at the refinery in 1998 as a chemical engineer, and I've worked through several different engineering type roles at the refinery. Also worked through management, production planning. I've spent a little bit of time in Canada with Suncor in some logistics types roles, and I've been back here at the refinery in my current role since 2017. I think I've met a couple of you at the refinery on some of the refinery bus tours that we've done. So nice to see some faces again. I grew up in New Mexico, but when I got my job at the refinery, I moved to Aurora, Colorado. So just adjacent in Aurora. I have two children, a 14-year-old and an 11-year-old, both born at Aurora Medical Center. So been here for a long time and call this home. Anyways, happy to meet you and happy to answer any questions that I can answer for you tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, April. And last but not least, if I could ask Leisha Burnett to introduce herself. Leisha heads up our community and stakeholder team here at the refinery.
Yeah, good evening, everyone, and thank you again for having us. Leisha Burnett. I think I've met and visited with many of you, and I'm looking forward to sharing some information with you this evening. Really appreciate your time. I also live in Northeast Denver. I'm married, and we are raising 3 children here.
Thank you, Leisha. Well, that was the team that's going to support me tonight and supports me here at the refinery. But before we start tonight, I would just want to address the event that happened last Wednesday. This was a disappointing event for us, especially coming after a strong few weeks of environmental and reliability performance in September and October. Let me just quickly outline the event for you. So on the 21st, around about 4 p.m., we had a failure of one of our transformers in the substation. The transformer then caused us to have to shut down a number of our units and make safe and park these units, and also allow us to check out and ensure that the ongoing running units were in a safe state. So through the first few hours, our aim was to ensure that the operation was, that our operators and our staff were safe, and we were able to do that fairly quickly. We also did some quick checks to see what was being emitted, and we see nothing that was going to cause any health concerns, but we promptly initiated some community monitoring and continued that for several days. And that monitoring didn't show any results that were of issue. In fact, they had no readings that we could record on our community monitoring devices, which we're looking at SO2, H2S, we're looking at VOCs, we're looking at H2S, VOCs, LALs, and CO. So these, we did not see any issues at all. Through the first 48 hours, we had ongoing work to do to shut down and make safe our plants. And right now we have plant 2 continued to run, while plant 1 and 3 are down to allow us to do repairs to that transformer. We see ourselves continuing in this state for a number of days until we've completed our investigation on the transformer, been able to successfully repair or replace it, and then recommission. But that is several days away. And when we get to that point, we'll certainly be informing the community of our restart plans. But today, we're running 1 of our 3 plants. The other 2 have been made safe. And it took us around 48 hours from the incident to park these units, get them in a safe state. In doing so, we had around 27 breaches to our permit that we needed to go through transient conditions to make safe these units. These covered carbon monoxide, opacity, sulfur dioxide, H2S in our flare, which burns to SO2, and some visible flaring, smoky flaring in the first half hour or so while we recovered our steam boilers. What I can say, the team acted promptly. There was nobody injured. We've worked to minimize these exceedances. We now have the units in a stable state while we repair. Some are shut down, some are parked. Plant 2 is operating while we look at replacement and repair to the transformer. I'm just going to stop there, but wanted to first let you know that we were disappointed by this event, and we have been taking action to repair the issue and also make safe and park the units while we're doing so. I'll just stop there for a minute in case there's any questions.
Councilwoman Lommel.
Thank you. A friend was driving by the Suncor refinery at 4 o'clock and took photos and video of the smoke and the flaring. At 5:08, we received an email from our acting city manager, Chief Nichols, to let us know that this had occurred. Then at 5:45, we received the official Suncor email that you send out to inform stakeholders. My concern is the hour and 45 minutes that residents in the area weren't aware of what was going on, didn't know if they should be concerned, but could see the smoke, could see the flare. What are you doing in those hour and 45 minutes to ensure that our residents are safe and are protected? What steps are you taking to make notifications and do it in a timely emergency manner?
Thank you. I hear your frustration, and let me just take you through some of the facts of the things that we went through in that hour and 45 minutes. In the first 15 minutes, we were concentrating on accounting for our personnel, checking the condition of the plant. We stood up our emergency operations center. We dispatched engineers into the field when it's safe to do so. And we made an assessment that there was no immediate threat to people outside the refinery. And we had made that within about 15 minutes. And that if we had had a threat, then we would have been working with ADCOM and others to do the appropriate actions to inform the community quicker. But we had made that assessment within 15 minutes. We then—
Can I interrupt for just one sec? How do you know that the air that's coming out with the flare, how do you know it's not H2S or some VOC or something that might be poisonous to our community members?
We have meters on that led us to believe that was not an issue. But we also at the same time were standing up our community monitoring team, or as an additional precaution to go and check that that was the case. And we had them stood up and dispatched somewhere around 4:42 is when they left the refinery. They did their first rounds of checks, and we received that back somewhere about 30 minutes or so later. It was that by that time we had been able to identify the cause. We knew that we had problems with our boilers. We were recommissioning steam. And then we pulled together our statement that we put out when we knew we had done these checks. That's what took an hour and 45 minutes to get there. But I can assure you that a lot quicker, we were in a position of believing there was no threat to the community.
I think somehow we have to find a way to compress the time when it comes to community members and informing them. So we've had the discussion many times when we've seen you, and I appreciate your willingness to come and speak to us after these upsets, incidents that are, the next one could be dangerous. We just don't know. And unfortunately, there's always a next one.
I think later in the presentation, we've had a lot of feedback from the community on how we can share information quicker and better. And I would like to go through that again later on when we come to that point, because we believe there is improvements we can make here to get a faster and more appropriate response into the community. And please come back if you feel we've not satisfied that at the end of this, but we have some time here to cover that tonight. Is there any other questions around the incident? Okay, let me move on to the presentation because I'm very conscious of your time. And is it possible to call up the first slide? We move on one and maybe to the next one. So just quickly, I wanted to remind you that Suncor, our purpose here is to provide energy, trusted energy that enhances people's lives while caring for each other and for the earth. We know we have work to do to build trust. We also know that we need to do more work to improve our environmental performance and to communicate better with our neighbours. Just wanted to say tonight we're going to go through some of the things that will allow us to show you what we're doing to try to earn that trust and bring back what we believe is the true operation of this refinery to where it should be. couple of things had come up in conversations, and I just wanted to give context that in Colorado, we provide about 1/3 of the gasoline. We provide around about 40% of the diesel. We are the largest supplier of asphalt, and we have a direct pipeline to DIA for jet fuel. These are our main products. And 80% of our feedstock is literally local. We are literally a local refinery supplying a local market using a local feedstock. And for the 20% that's not coming locally, it tends to be a heavy crude. Some of that comes from Canada. And that heavy crude is used to allow us to make asphalt, because the local crudes are very light, and the processes for making that don't allow us to make asphalt that the local state here needs, and we need it for our roadways. So just wanted to remind people about what the refinery does, and very much we are a local refinery. I'll move to the next slide, please, if we can. A question that had come up was around how do we measure our performance? Do we know, are we getting better? I would say that our best year, in terms of we measure that through exceedances of our permit, our best year in the last 5 years was 124 exceedances in a year. We were looking to set our target, we have set our target to be as good as that this year. Unfortunately, after this event, we will be unable to do that. We've had somewhere around 139 exceedances now, including this recent event. And up to then, we were on track, if we'd had a good finish, to achieve that target. But sadly, we won't get there. But if we compare it with where we were last year, where we had 396 exceedances, we are way below that. Now, last year is not a benchmark we want to measure ourselves against. What we want to measure ourselves against is doing the best we've done ever and beating that every year and driving for continuous improvement. But tonight, what we're going to go through is some of the top 4 incidents that made up these exceedances prior to the event of last week. And one of the things I want to do there is to hand over to Heather Sastoff to take us through some of the work that we've been doing, coming out of the learnings from these incidents, how we're improving for them, the changes we've made. I'm going to ask Heather to take us through that in a minute. But I'm just going to stop there. We had heard, how do we measure? This is the way we measure. We're not going to hit our target. We're disappointed, but we have made significant improvement compared to last year, but we're way from satisfied from that improvement. We want to do much better still. Is there any questions around our targets?
Any questions at this time from council? Seeing none, please proceed, Mr. Austin.
Heather, could I ask you to take us through just some of the corrective actions and improvements we've made coming out of some recent incidents?
Sure. Thank you, Donald. And if you can just advance one slide for me, please. Yes. All incidents at Suncor as an entity, as well as specifically at this refinery, we take each and every incident as a serious both learning opportunity, but also to ensure that we get to the root cause and understand what and how to prevent a reoccurrence of that, regardless of if it's a safety related incident, if it's an environmental, or if it's a reliability incident that happens. Each and every time we take a targeted approach using trained and specialized investigation leads, specifically in higher consequence type incidents, to make sure that we really get to both an understanding of the root cause of these incidents, identify what the improvement opportunities can be, and ensure that we appropriately document and action to make sure that those improvements materialize and we continue to improve and perform better and better. So this year, a couple of the incidents that we did, very thorough, very deep, high quality investigations are listed on the screen here. Events related to our air blowers in our FCC, a couple of incidents related to electrical systems, as well as a tail gas unit in June where we had an integrity leak on one of our piping systems. A couple of the key themes that came from these investigations we wanted to share with you as well. Primarily, the first one I would note is that related to these investigations, there were some improvements that we identified and have taken action against. So design related and how we use these systems. We've also done some equipment repairs related to the findings of those investigations, and to ensure that there isn't another system or another piece of equipment that also has this sort of failure or problem related to it, we then extended those learnings to other parts of the facility and did some additional testing and inspection to make sure that there wasn't a similar situation somewhere else inside of the refinery, and then shared that broadly within our organization as well. Always, there's opportunities with our personnel as well in the guidance and direction that we give to them through the procedures, as well as the way that we do our preventative maintenance activities as well, and training around preventative maintenance. And so those really were the key corrective action themes that we had. And to just give you a bit of an understanding, some of the electrical system, there's pictures of those attached here on the slide for you. They seem relatively simple, but these are actually quite complex components related to our refinery operation and some of the areas where we had some issues through the course of 2020. Any questions for me on that content?
Are there any questions at this time? Seeing none, please proceed.
Yeah, if I could just, before we move on, just give a little bit of detail behind some of the things that Heather had mentioned. If we could go back one slide for a minute for me. If you look at the picture at the top right, you'll see what caused our FCC event, a reversal. It was a wire that contacted that caused the trip. Not just repairing that, we actually went further. We've changed the design of our shutdown system. It won't stop this happening again, but what it'll do is minimize the impact. What took us something like 30 minutes to get under control, we can do in 1 or 2 minutes. And we're not satisfied with that either. We're looking to improve that again and try and get that down to seconds. So our work went beyond just fixing what broke. It's actually about improving not just the integrity of the system, but the control of the system as well. So just to give you a feel for the depth in which we get into. Any questions here? Okay, maybe if we can move on, and if I could ask Brian just to talk through for us about air emissions and community monitoring. I know these are questions that come up previously, and we'd like to just use this to start a discussion and answer any questions you've got in this area. Brian, could I ask you to do that?
Yes, Donald. Thank you. Next slide, please. Okay, I know Donald has shared with you all in the past some of the regulatory oversight that the refinery is under. And, I would say, based on that, there are lots of reporting requirements that the refinery has to adhere to with regard to our air emissions. And it depends obviously on the specific rule, the regulation, or what's in our permit. CDPHE is the primary authority for us on our air emissions, but there are things that we also have to report to the EPA as well. And reporting is required, whenever we do exceed a permit limit, or even sometimes when the rule requires it. So an example is, if we have an opacity excursion event in our one of our FCC units, we have to report that to CDPHE. But there are certain limits, like maybe excess SO2 emissions, and we have more than 500 pounds of SO2 maybe go out the flare or something like that in a 24-hour period. We have to actually notify the EPA and the National Response Center for that. Same thing, you know, if there was a spill onto a waterway such as Sand Creek or something, we would have to notify the EPA as well through the National Response Center and have to do that right away, immediate notifications. So there are some notifications that require notification right away, but most are next business day type notifications, follow-up reports, and documents that we submit to the corresponding agency. You know, as Donald mentioned, you know, one event can have multiple exceedances. They're not always just you know, one incidence, one exceedance. We do have a lot of sources in the refinery, lots of equipment, each with its own permit limit. You take an example of one of our flares might have 15 to 17 different permit limits on just that one flare alone. So when you have an event or an incident, there's a lot of data to go through and a lot of information to report and put forward to the respective agencies when that occurs. You know, the other thing I would note is that some of our permit limits are on a very short time frame. It's like something like an opacity might just be a 6-minute average. You know, what's the average opacity for this 6-minute period? Then what's the average opacity for the next 6-minute period? And that's how the permit conditions are spelled out. But there's others that are maybe a 1-hour average, maybe a 3-hour average, 12-hour, 24-hour average, and it goes up to even an annual average or maybe a rolling 12-month average. So they're not just permit limits that are instantaneous. There are permit limits that are looking at refinery emissions over a long period of time as well. The other thing, you know, the other thing I would say around the permit limits is that, you know, not all permit limits and conditions are the same, and not all of them. There's not always ones that account for starting up and shutting down periods. A lot of the permit limits, I would say, are really set at steady state operation, but there are transition periods when you're starting a unit up or you're bringing a unit down where you're at higher risk of exceeding a permit limit just because of the nature of the equipment and the way it has to be shut down and or started up. But you know, just as even if we don't have permit limit exceedances, we do try to keep CDPHE in particular informed of what's going on at the refinery, just like we do to the community and you all as well. So if we have planned maintenance activities, startup activities, et cetera, and we think that there could be some increased flaring and maybe other visible activities, noise, that type of stuff from the refinery, we will try and notify folks ahead of time just so they're aware and hopefully can ask questions and answer questions beforehand. Any questions on our permit or air emissions and reporting? Okay, next slide. With respect to community air monitoring, so when we do dispatch personnel out into the community, our personnel take portable gas meters. And as you know, Donald talked to earlier, these portable gas meters can measure you know, percent oxygen, which isn't normally something we're looking at during an upset event, but carbon monoxide, hydrogen sulfide, sulfur dioxide, flammable and combustible vapors, what we call LEL or lower explosive limit, and volatile organic compound. Our meters typically measure these compounds in the part per million range. So maybe not nearly as sensitive as what some of the community air monitoring stations at CDPHE may have around, but still very accurate. And these are the same meters that we use to ensure the safety of our personnel inside the refinery, employees and contractors, when they may be doing such things as confined space entries or opening a piece of equipment to do maintenance. We need to make sure, do they need to have any respiratory protection on for when they're doing that work or not? Or do we need to maybe purge that equipment a little bit more, clean it a little bit more before we let personnel go into it. So I think very confident in the meters and their capability to measure in real time for these types of situations. We do look for, so when we're out doing community monitoring, we compare the readings that we get to levels that are set by the U.S. Occupational Safety and Health Administration, so OSHA, what the American Industrial Hygiene Association might set for workplace exposures, and also what the American Conference of Governmental Industrial Hygienists might use for emergency response planning purposes. And so those limits that are set, OSHA and the American Industrial Hygiene Association, the limits that they set forth and that they provide are limits that they say, a worker could be exposed to for 8 hours a day, 40 days a week for essentially their entire working career, and it's deemed to be okay. And so, those are the things that we have the capability to measure and what we're looking for when we're out doing community monitoring during an event. We do also have access to the CDPHE community air monitoring stations, as everyone does. And so we can check those during an event as well and see if there are any changes in that community air monitoring station that could be potentially related to our events. I will say, as I mentioned earlier, those stations do have more sophisticated instrumentation and monitoring capabilities than what our portable meters do. And they do, they are measuring from a lot of different sources, not necessarily just Suncor's operations, but traffic, homes, other industry in the area could be contributing to the readings that may show up on those stations as well. If we do have, if our air monitoring data does exceed the standards, from OSHA, AIHA, or ACGIH, whichever one's the lowest, we will correspond or collaborate, work with local response authorities, primarily through the Adams County Communication System, through the 911, and or if South Adams Fire or Fire Department was on scene with us responding to the incident, we would work with their on-scene commander and coordinate the appropriate actions that may need to be taken in the public domain for that. Any questions?
Brian, when we did the monitoring last week, can you explain to people what we found?
Yeah, so the personnel, they obtain the wind direction and obviously what's going on in the refinery, and they try and go out downwind of the refinery and drive around looking for readings, stopping at key locations, maybe major intersections. We do give priority to stopping at schools, hospitals, public event centers, even though there's not a whole lot of public gatherings these days with COVID, but we would do that as well, looking for giving priority to those areas, but just checking neighborhoods, community as well, and documenting what the readings are that are picked up on the meter at that time, and any other observations, right? But maybe the meter doesn't pick up anything, but there is some type of odor in the area. And so they document those things and they relay that information back to the Suncor personnel that are managing the incident. And so as Donald alluded to, the event from last week, we started the community monitoring following the event, and we continued that for essentially 48 hours after that event until everything was stabilized and emissions were back within limits, and we did not pick up any readings on our meter at any time during that time period.
Thank you, Brian. Any questions for us on community air monitoring or the standards that we work to? Okay, thank you. Could we maybe move to the next slide then? What I wanted to talk about here was the sheen we observed back on May 7th in Sand Creek. As one of our operators was patrolling along the creek that we do on a regular basis, he noticed a very slight sheen. And if you look at the picture on the left, a bit difficult to see, but we've seen a couple of bubbles come up to the surface, sheen appear. He promptly reported that. We dispatched a couple of our engineers, and they watched in that area for over an hour or so before they seen another bubble and a little bit of sheen. So this is what we had observed. This is troubling when it's along your boundary. And so we instituted a lot of work over the next few months to identify what was the source of the sheen. In that work, we did additional drilling and checking on the Sand Creek side of our barrier wall, looking for material that could cause the sheen. We also managed to gather from little parts of the sheen very small quantities of the sheen, and we're able to analyze it. And when we analyzed this oil that was on the surface, we found that it was what we'd call as an aged distillate. And by aged, we mean we could tell that it was over 20 years old. So this is a material that had come to the surface that had been there for a long time. When we look along our boundary, we didn't see anything coming from the site that would cause this. And when we add that to the fact that we had seen this aged distillate, we came to the conclusion there was something underneath the surface of the water in the creek bed that we needed to identify. So what you've seen us go and do was barrier off part of the creek, drain that down, go in, check that soil, remove that soil, and we found some contamination with that aged distillate there. And we removed some 850 cubic yards. We believe this was left behind after work that was done in the late 1990s to move the creek, and had been sitting there for a long time, and eventually has started to bubble to the surface. And since then, in this area, we've removed all that contaminated soil that was under the creek, and we continue to monitor this by patrols that we do on a regular basis. So I think at the end of this, what we're confident is that we found that area and where it was coming from. It wasn't coming from within the refinery. It was coming from work that had happened 20 plus years ago, had got buried under the creek and had come to the surface. And we continue to monitor the creek to see if anything else appears. So I wanted to give you a bit of detail around what we did, what we found, and what we believe was the cause of the Sand Creek incident. Can I just pause there and see if there's any questions?
Councilwoman Noble.
Will it be remediated?
It has, that area has been remediated. We've removed 850 cubic yards, and we've replaced that with equivalent, and we've actually matted over the area so that and returned it back, and we are returning the banks to normal. So the remediation for that piece has been done.
Councilwoman Owen Thomas.
Yes, thank you. I was just curious too that you stated the investigation showed it was aged diesel fuel. Is this, so was the investigation just conducted by Suncor, or did another outside company confirm that, or is this just your staff?
No, the analysis to do that, because there's a very small sample we had, and we sent it to a specialist laboratory. And Brian, maybe you can help me here and just explain to people who did this analysis for us. It was a third party.
Yeah, it was a third-party lab and actually in Oklahoma that kind of does this forensics on the historical or underground contamination, can help age the material and identify what it is. So we sent it to that lab, and they're the ones that gave us the results that it's at least 20 years old. Could be older than that, but that's as far back as their study data or their forensics capabilities are in that lab.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and are those made open to the public somewhere where they can review that you know, the results?
On you go, Brian.
I was going to say all the results and data have been shared with CDPHE, so I know they would be public through them.
Okay. And then who is continuously monitoring though those barriers that are put up? And how often are they still being checked and by who?
So it is Suncor personnel that are monitoring the barriers. I can't recall the exact frequency that all the wells along our property boundary, both inside and outside the barrier wall, are gauged and or sampled, monitored, and checked, but they are quite frequent, and there are quite frequent walks along Sand Creek looking for issues like that was discovered in May.
Okay, because I'm just curious. So what do you mean approximately? What do you mean though by quite frequent? Can you give me like an approx how often what quite frequent means?
It could be weekly or it could be monthly that the groundwater wells are gauged in the area and checked.
Okay.
So some are on different intervals, so I can't speak to each one exactly.
Okay. And then if something else were to occur in the water, are you notifying CDPHE or who's notified if something different is seen?
Yes, we would notify CDPHE, and in this particular case, this would be considered no different than oil on a waterway, so no different than if a barge or a ship, down in the Gulf Coast or somewhere had a spill. So we reported that to the NRC as well, the EPA's National Response Center.
Okay, thank you.
Is there anything else we can explain here?
Councilwoman Graham.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Austin, just curious who oversees or who oversaw the remediation? Is there an outside agency that signs off on the remediation?
Yeah, I mean, in this case there is, and I'll let Brian explain who gets involved. Brian, can you maybe just take through how we had to deal with this and the Army Corps that was involved with us and what permissions we were given?
Yes, so for this particular event, CDPHE was the primary authority and agency that oversaw this, and so shared a lot of the plans, the findings, the investigation results, and the remediation activities with them, and we reviewed the closure, if you will, or the remediation with CDPHE, and have an ongoing monitoring, post-event monitoring process in place with them to help ensure that the area has been fully remediated. As Donald mentioned, because of the creek being in a floodplain and in a waterway of the U.S., we did have to work a little bit with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers just when the creek was temporarily blockaded off or some of the flow was restricted, made narrower. We had to work with them and made sure we followed the right rules and precautions for doing that work in the creek at that point in time.
Great, thank you.
Councilwoman Allen Thomas.
Yes, thank you. I just had one more question then. Is it possible then to remove the Diesel Creek that's been in there then 20 years, or because it's still there, correct? So is that a possible option to remove it?
In that area, we have removed all the bed of the creek and actually have put fresh bed in there, and we've actually matted over it, so it has been removed there.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Okay, just in conscious of time, we'll move on. And Christina, maybe I could ask you to talk about our refinery integrity programs and where they sit. We had a number of questions around how do we ensure that the refinery is fit for operation.
Absolutely, Donald. So if we could move to the next slide, please. Thank you. So earlier you heard Heather speak to some of our corrective and responsive actions when it comes to incidents. And you also heard Brian speak to the fact that we're not only regulated by CDPHE, but also the EPA. what I'd like to talk to the team about here today is that we're also regulated by the Occupational Health and Safety Administration, or OSHA. And so when many of you think about OSHA, you probably think about personal safety. So for us, employee safety, personal safety, that would be with respect to how to keep an individual safe and out of harm's way. So fall protection, personal protective equipment, making sure that we're out of the line of fire and that they're ergonomically correct when doing maintenance and operating procedures out in the field. But we're also regulated by OSHA around process safety management. And process safety management establishes the regulations and the oversight for how do we prevent incidents, just as you were concerned about and as you're thinking about. So how do we eliminate or minimize consequences and keep things in the pipe and reduce any consequences or eliminate consequences from hazardous materials, leaving the process that they're intended to stay within. And so the bulk of our work on site actually focuses on meeting those regulations and maintaining the integrity of the facility. So examples of that are listed here on the screen. So Heather spoke to the incident investigations. OSHA actually, through process safety management, regulates how we do our lessons learned. How do we apply learnings from not only incidents that we've had on site, but incidents from the industry. OSHA would regulate things such as our mechanical integrity program, our inspection program, our design requirements, what codes we have to meet as part of those inspections and designs. Also our documentation, our procedures, our training. And another large piece of the process safety management is our process hazard analysis. And what that process involves is a very thorough step-by-step review of every process that we have in the refinery to say, what are the potential consequences that could happen if you have changes in our process? So if our flow changes, if we have more flow, if we have less flow, if our temperatures change, if our pressures change, and what safety systems we have to manage those changes in a process. And so OSHA also requires us to do a compliance audit every 3 years to the PSM standard. And in the last audit that we had in 2019, the refinery was actually commended for a number of our standards within that process safety management program. So mechanical integrity, our process hazard analysis tools, and operating procedures being a few examples of where they actually highlighted that we do a good job. The other one is around employee participation. So those audits will look at how involved are our employees, what do they know about process safety management, and then they look through a number of documentation and do some spot checks on record keeping. So just want to highlight that I think there was a question around what are we doing to manage and make sure that we don't have an incident. And not only are we regulated around that through OSHA, it is one of our core focus areas that we want to keep not only our employees safe from process safety hazards, as well as the community as well. With respect to my team in the maintenance and reliability group, we have a number of different areas. So maintenance teams will look specifically and work specifically on maintaining the assets. So if equipment breaks, they're going out to repair it. Another large piece of their work is actually preventative maintenance. So we're looking proactively to make sure that we don't have incidents. So Heather had mentioned earlier around preventative maintenance strategies was one of the areas that we look to improve. And I would say that that's a continuous improvement that we take from lessons learned, we take from industry learnings, and continuously improve those preventative maintenance programs. There's also a number of predictive tools that have come into the industry that we utilize to track and analyze through technology to predict when a failure might occur, so we can go out and get ahead of that as well. So not only are we maintaining our assets when they fail, we're looking for ways to prevent failures, and we're continuously improving our reliability through those programs. In addition to day-to-day maintenance, every 5 years, the refinery will take down, and ours is actually staggered, as you probably heard Donald speak to. We have plant 1 and 3 that are somewhat coupled together, and then we have plant 2. So every 5 years, we'll take down large sections of the plant, and we'll do a massive maintenance that we call a turnaround. And so it takes about 2 years to plan for a turnaround of this magnitude. It's about 30 to 45 days that we will have people working day and night, and we bring in anywhere from 800 to 1,000 additional employees to do that maintenance during this short window that we shut the entire plant down and do a lot of equipment work. And that could include regulatory inspections where we aren't able to get inside equipment and do our inspection monitoring while it's online. We're able to do that in those 5-year turnaround windows where we take equipment down, clean it out, do those inspections, make repairs as required, document, and then plan for the next inspection as required. We also install major capital projects that we aren't able to do while we're online. And so these 5-year outages are very important for us to plan appropriately for, and we have a lot of focus coming up to one here in March of next year that we have a lot of work that we're going to execute, and it's a big undertaking, but absolutely necessary for us to conduct those outages such that we can have a safe and reliable run for the next 5 years. Any questions on that?
And Christina, just to build on your presentation a little bit, with turnarounds, we've come to do these at 5-year intervals. And that isn't just us deciding ourselves, that has come through the industry with similar equipment, giving guidance on what the right frequency are. So this is not just something we decide, it's things that we take advice from others in the industry and build into our programs. Is that fair?
That's correct.
Thank you. Any questions on how we maintain and ensure the integrity of our assets?
Councilman Guardiola.
Thank you, Mayor. I know when we first got on council, you guys were in the middle of a turnaround. What plant was that? 1 and 3, or which one was it?
When you came the last time was 2018, and that was plant 2. Right, so plant 2 will go through its next one in 23, and we're going into plant 1 and 3 in 21. So that will happen in 21, 26, 31, etc. So
with the issues that we've been having with all the malfunctions and everything, is that coming from plant 1 and 3 or 2?
I would say somewhere in both plants. I mean, the FCC issues we've had have been in plant 2. The other issues have been mainly in plant 1 and 3. And I would say the big change we've made in plant 2 FCC is the enhancement and the improvement in that control system. It may not stop some things happening, but it'll minimize the impact dramatically.
Cool, thank you.
Councilwoman Noble.
Yes, I'm curious how many miles of pipeline are under plants 1, 2, and 3, and how do you maintain the integrity of the pipelines?
Christina, you might want to explain what your previous job was and then answer that question.
I can do that. Thank you, Donald. So prior to coming to this role with Suncor, I was the director of U.S. pipelines for the previous 5 years. So, I have a little bit of knowledge about pipeline and inspections, although I cannot tell you how many miles of pipeline we have under our 2 plants, but we do have a number of underground lines. Our inspection programs, again, they're regulated by OSHA and the NPSM. So we have, they'll tell us which standards we have to follow. And there's a certain frequency by which we have to inspect those lines. And then there's also different methods that we can use. And so depending on the type of service that the line is in, what our inspection records have shown us as far as the quality, or I shouldn't say the quality, the integrity of the line, and what data we have, that'll set how frequently we will actually inspect the line. And those inspections can range from, doing excavation and looking at the line and then using tools such that we can see what the thickness of the line is. There's also tools they're called smart pigs, but basically they're little computers and they run through the pipeline, and they'll get data from inside the pipe, and it'll tell us what the thickness is. It'll tell us if there's potential dents. It'll tell us if there's anything that we want to tell it or that we want to ask it, it'll give us that data, and very detailed GPS information on those lines. So we don't necessarily run a smart tool on every single line. It does depend on, like I said, the type of service that it's in, the age of the line. We call them different threats. So what type of soil is it in? A number of different items that go into that assessment, but API guidelines is actually what OSHA says we have to follow to manage the inspection of those lines.
What's the lifetime of a pipeline?
So that will depend on the pipe and a number of different factors. So again, what's running through it? Is it constantly running? Is there is there water in the line? What type of, how is it sitting in the ground? Is it in sandy soil? Is it in moisture? Is there moisture in the soil around it? So the age of a pipe in underground can vary depending on a number of different factors.
What's the best you can get out of a pipe? The best conditions under Suncor, not anywhere else, but under Suncor.
I think if I could maybe just answer that slightly differently. What we're always measuring in the pipe is the thickness, and it's the rate of loss of that thickness. And we set a minimum standard. And when it gets to that, we shut the pipe down. And we're able to track over time how much metal, if you like, we're losing for the pipe. And depending on all the factors that Christina has described, that will project when a pipe will come to end of life. Some pipes can last tens of years. Some are more frequent, and it's all a function of the various variables. But what we measure is thickness, and we track thickness. And when we get to that minimum thickness, we take the pipe out of service.
Okay, and do you replace it? I mean, we know that it was the thinness, that is, of a pipe that led to the explosion in Pennsylvania that took out the entire refinery. Their refinery is now gone because of the impact of that explosion.
Yep, and most cases we do replace it, but there is other techniques as well. It can be lined, it can be repaired in many ways. Sometimes you don't need to take the whole pipe out. It might just be a few inch sections that we need to do. So depending on what we find, it can range from full replacement to repair sections to lining. There's various techniques that we would use.
Thank you.
Any other questions on our maintenance and integrity of maintaining the integrity of the assets?
Councilwoman Grimes.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, just kind of as a follow-up to Ms. Noble's questions, I was curious, if you also use cathodic protection on the pipelines?
Yes, we do. And Christina, again, I'm in your area of specialty, not mine.
So cathodic protection is used in some areas. I would say it's more significantly used on like transfer pipelines into the refinery for pipes within the plant. It is used where it makes sense, but there's different methods for maintaining the integrity of those pipes, and it's a combination of inspections, cathodic protection, you know, how you're utilizing the pipe, making sure that we're flushing, you know, isolation programs, etc.
Great, thank you.
Councilman Wadiola.
Sorry, Mayor, I didn't put my hand up.
Councilwoman Noble.
Hand issue.
Any other questions for Suncor at this time? Please proceed.
Okay, thank you. Maybe if I could call on April just to talk a little bit about our investment program, our capital program. Maybe you could give the council members an idea of what we do here. Could we move to the next slide?
Absolutely, Donald. Yeah, thank you. Again, my name is April. So the refinery requires regular and significant amounts of money be invested to keep it up to date. And so there are several different reasons why we'd invest money in the refinery. One is to be able to execute these cyclic turnarounds. So as I said, every 5 years, sections of the plant are being taken down for a full turnaround, where we shut that whole section of the plant down, go through rigorous inspection. We replace components that are worn out or at end of life or that need to be upgraded. We invest new money into new technologies, and we will reroute and rearrange things to get to the next 5-year interval as needed. Since we have really the 2 sections of the plant, we're doing this every 2 years. We are in this current plant 1 turnaround, plants 1 and 3 turnaround that we're planning for March 2021. We'll be spending about $90 million for that turnaround. It is spread over about 2 years, so $17 million this year, and then next year we will be spending the remainder of the money. And in that 2018 turnaround that you went in and you took a look at a couple of years ago, that was about $43 million. So significant amounts of money are spent on these 5-year intervals. That is only that period for those turnarounds. Since 2015, Commerce City has spent about $400 million in full capital investment in the refinery. So it would include the turnaround, but it also includes investment in new technology to be able to meet new regulations, to be able to be efficient and up to date with new technologies that come along, new customer demands, fuels that are different in some slight way or coming from ASTM or from the EPA that say you need to reduce sulfur, you need to reduce gasoline, benzene, you need to reduce the amount of pollutants in your wastewater, those types of things. So when these new regulations come or these new customer demands come, we will put together the project and the capital investment to execute the work to be able to meet those demands. We're also through the process that Christina talked about a little while ago, through process safety management, conducting process hazard analysis, through regular inspections, through the refinery inspection program and things like that. We will find things that we say, you know what, we can do better. We can reduce our risk by this amount by making an investment, installing some type of technology to have some redundant level controls. Maybe it's cathodic protection on a piece of pipe that didn't have it in the past, those types of things. So we're regularly going through cyclical reviews of all of our process technology and addressing the hazards that we identify through capital investment. want to take you back in time a little bit. So some of the comments around, this refinery was built in 1931. How long does a refinery last? Maybe sort of implying that it's potentially out of date and past its time. The refinery that was built in 1931 really doesn't exist today. There have been so many investments and changes in pieces of pipe and pieces of metal and different units in that refinery that maybe some of the brick foundations are still there, but the equipment from that time has been changed over as it comes to the end of life. Back in 1931, when I think it was the Colorado Refining Company decided to put a refinery in this location, it was because we had ample supply of really nice, sweet Colorado crude. Just truck it right into the refinery. It was the first continuous refinery, well, in the United States, and very proud to have it in Colorado. Started being able to truck in this really nice, sweet Colorado crude, pump it through the refinery, and it mainly supplied kerosene and diesel products, so distillate products, to a growing Denver economy. So it was kerosene for lighting and diesel for the new railroads. We had railroads going back and forth right next to the refinery. Also had a river. At that time, the river was useful for refining processes to take water and use the water for cooling and things like that. But over time, we've had to advance. So then there was a strong demand for gasoline. Automobiles became very popular. When World War II happened, again, it was let's all hands on deck and produce fuel for the military so we could supply the military efforts for World War II. So plant 1 was built in 1931. By 1937, plant 2 was built. In the late 60s, early 70s, plant 3 was built. Plant 3 was built to be able to import more of the sour, heavier crudes and to be able to produce asphalt. Its primary purpose then and even today was to make asphalt and pave the roads across Colorado for sure, but even out into the interstates because we were one of the primary asphalt producers. And just want to sort of paint that picture that over time, as customers have demanded new and different products, as the government has demanded that we change the way that we operate with new regulations coming from OSHA. PSM came into effect in the early 90s following some other industrial accidents. So as these regulations from OSHA, PS Process Safety Management, come into play, best technologies and ways to make sure that the integrity of our industry is the best that it can be, from API, following API codes, and just the vast number of different agencies and regulations that we fall under. We have invested money. So $1.4 billion has been invested by Suncor since they bought the refinery in 2003. In the last 5 years, we've spent about $400 million on capital investment. Over the next 3 years, we plan to spend another $300 million. So it's no small effort to invest this money into the refinery. And again, the reasons why we do it, we pay for the turnarounds. That's to keep us going strong for another 5 years. We're installing new equipment to meet the environmental regulations, reduce our emissions, meet new fuel specifications, those kinds of things. Investing the money to upgrade our equipment, install new technology, best in the industry types of technology and unit infrastructure, and then just replace equipment as it gets old. As the pipe becomes too thin, we can predict that, and we then take that piece of pipe out of service and replace it with a new piece of pipe. Pumps wear out, compressors wear out, towers wear out, and over time, you predict when that end of life is going to be, and you make a plan to invest money to replace it. And with this amount of money that we're spending here at the refinery, this is money that is being invested into the employees at the refinery, into all of the service providers around Commerce City and around Colorado, the workers that are coming into the refinery to conduct this work. They're all eating at local restaurants. They're sleeping in the local hotels. They're buying the gasoline and paying the fuel taxes here. And not just that, but on a regular day-to-day basis. I mean, this refinery is making 100,000, or we process on a regular average day 100,000 barrels a day of crude oil in the refinery and out the door as products. Full slate of transportation fuel products. If a person is filling up a 20-gallon tank, that's 105,000 gallons of gasoline going in. So 105,000 tanks are being filled up every single day in Colorado coming from our refinery. And that's, most of them are the average people, right? They're the people that are going to work, they're going to school, they're going to the grocery store, they're doing their daily life. And so it's really important for me as a member of this economy and as a citizen of Colorado, local to the community, that we have these fuels, and more importantly, that we're running a refinery that's safe and as environmentally clean and conscious as we possibly can be. I mean, our goal is to never have a refinery emission. And it's reliable, right? Safe for the people that work there, but also safe, process safety wise, safe for the community, and that we don't have any massive events. So when you really think about how much is going into the refinery to be able, investment going into the refinery to keep it safe, people safe, the process safe, the community safe, it's a lot. And we strive to always do better. And just thinking back to what that refinery was in 1931 to what it is today, we will continue to always be investing in this refinery to do the best so that we can continue to produce transportation fuels for the future. And as we're continuing to move along in the spectrum of what kind of fuels, back in the early 1930s, it was kerosene and diesel, quickly grew into a gasoline economy, producing asphalt. But as we continue to look at the future, Suncor is a transformational company, and looking at, okay, well, how do renewables play into this? We blend 10% ethanol into all of our gasoline. We blend biodiesel into our distillate fuel. We've explored renewable fuels to go into the jet fuel if there's a demand for it at the international airport, Denver International Airport. So always looking to the future to say, what investments can we make to be able to meet the demands of our customer? And the customer comes from Colorado. And so, I just wanted to paint that picture that the investment is always ongoing to keep the refinery safe, to keep it up to date, and to meet the demands of the customer and the regulators. I could go through a whole bunch of stats and other reasons and things that we do, but I think at that point, I'll just open it up for questions and see, is there anything that you guys want to know specifically about how or why we invest in the refinery?
Councilwoman Noel.
Did you say 100,000 gallons go out daily?
No, so it would be 2.1 million gallons of gasoline. What I said was 105,000 fill-ups. So if you have a 20-gallon gasoline tank, there's about 105,000 times a day that somebody is filling their tank in Colorado.
Yes, but how much is Suncor selling out of the refinery?
That would be how much we're selling out of the refinery.
Okay, and do you pay taxes on that to Commerce City for that?
So we pay property tax, we pay income tax. I mean, I'm not the tax official, so I'm not sure how many other taxes we're paying. I know property
sales tax, use tax.
The sales tax would be the consumer is paying the sales tax when they buy the gasoline at the pump.
Okay, but there's no sales tax to Commerce City for the refinery being in Commerce City.
There's property tax.
Property tax. Is there use tax for anything at the?
Yeah, maybe I don't
know. Possibly Mr. Austin knows.
It's a question I'd have to get back to you on. I know that we pay taxes to Adams County, Commerce City, to the state and the feds. The breakdown of that, let me get back to you and I'll send that to you.
Okay.
And the types of taxes that are, because I don't know it well enough to give you a straight answer, and I'd like to give you the right answer.
Okay, thank you. And given the amount of expenditures in capital investments in the refinery, has it ever been part of your plan to perhaps buy the homes in Elyria, Swansea, and South Commerce City, where people have apparently now live too close to the refinery?
Not to my knowledge that it's been a plan to buy those houses. No, not to my knowledge. I mean, yeah.
What kind of investment is done in the communities beyond Boys and Girls Club? Do you help with health at all, that kind of thing? Health programs? What health programs do you work on?
Leisha, would you be able to speak to that?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yep, we can, Lisa.
Okay. I don't have that data in front of me, but we do have a summary of our sort of annual community investment plan in terms of the specific health-related partnerships that we engage with in the area. They include Clinica Tepeyac, Kids Health First. Those are the two I can think of off the top of my head, including the more education focused, but certainly Kids Health First, Clinica Tepeyac, the 9 health fairs across Colorado. Those are just a couple I can think of off the top of my head. I know we've provided some of the community engagement and community investment programs to the council before, but happy to update that and bring it back to you.
Okay, thank you. And my understanding from Kids First is that they actually don't receive money from Suncor. But I'm finished with my questions on this section. I'm sorry. I know I have other council members who have questions.
Okay.
Mr. Tinklenberg.
Yes, sir. I can answer the question about taxes. There's use tax that's paid on the materials, like for the turnarounds and general repairs. And then sales tax is paid whenever Suncor makes a retail sale. And so that would be, excuse me, any of the asphalt sales that are made, is my understanding. So there are taxes that are collected each year.
Yeah, that was going to be one of my follow-ups to Councilwoman Noble, is that every time we buy something from any of the vendors in the community, when we write that purchase order, there is always the sales tax on the things that we buy, the services and the materials that we buy to use to invest into the refinery. So that was one place where I know we pay tax. Any other questions?
Councilman Guardiola.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I think, you know, I agree with you. Thank you for the update on all the investments to keeping our community safe, updating the plants. But to me, as a lifelong resident since 1983, I still would like to see Suncor more in the community and what they actually do. It's taken a lawsuit to get 2.6 million, and it might not even come into Commerce City. We're going to share with Larry and Swansea. So when we're talking about capital investment, this is great, and I agree with you, and I appreciate that. But to be a good corporate partner, we want to see community investment slides too, because that is what helps our community on a different level. So I would love to see those numbers and see what you guys do and what we could help collaborate and do more, right? I think there's always growing that we could both do and collaborate and moving forward. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. You know, since this is a study session, one of the thoughts about collaboration is we need skilled workers. And I think we've talked about this in the past, but from engineers, qualified engineers, qualified craftspeople, so people, pipe fitters, welders, electricians, instrument technicians. And you know, now that we're installing more automation and controls in the refinery, we need more computer network specialists, people that are in IT, people that understand controls and computer programming, right? And then the operators themselves that work at the refinery. And these are people who really, you know, you really start to want to dedicate your waking hours to the refinery, because it is a 24/7 operation, and it's really something you have a lifelong career working at this refinery with really high wages. And it's amazing to me that we have this employer in Colorado, in Commerce City, with vacancies all the time. We're always looking for qualified people, and it is really difficult to find qualified people. So how can we get into the, you know, high schools, into the trade schools, into the community colleges, and then even into the universities? I mean, we definitely go try from engineering, right? We try to go and recruit at Colorado School of Mines, CSU, and CU, and that's where quite a few of our really good engineers have come from. But is there a way to get more information about what we do, the careers that are available at our refinery, maybe some apprentice type programs in place so that people can get a flavor for the type of work here, out into the community so people understand, like, if you want to train up, you have a good career ahead of you working at that refinery, right? And then you have local people doing a local job at a local refinery, running local crude for the local consumer, right? It's all right here, homegrown in Colorado. And that's, something to collaborate on. I think that's an area where we could really work together.
Yeah, and I definitely agree, but I think it starts with trust, because right now our community does not trust Suncor. And it's a sore spot for a lot of us that have lived here for many, many years, that it was just taken, and hasn't given back. So I think establishing these study sessions, which are great, I think, and starting to trust each other as good partners. And then I think we could definitely collaborate with the school districts and the different community colleges in the metropolitan area. But I believe it just starts with trust first. And there's a lot of mistrust right now in our community in Suncor.
Yeah. And it might be also just lack of information, right? People don't understand what we do. And so it's just the ugly refinery, not understanding what goes into keeping it operating, right? So, okay, thank you. Any other questions?
Councilwoman Noble.
Yes, thank you. Speaking of what goes into the community, I was curious about, earlier it was mentioned that the air monitoring system for Suncor isn't as refined, if you will, as the CDPHE's is. So I was wondering, what parts per million are you actually measuring for things like sulfur dioxide and hydrogen sulfide? And one of the reasons I asked the question is because at lower levels, hydrogen sulfide causes irritation of the eyes, nose, and throat. Moderate levels can cause headache, dizziness, nausea, and vomiting, as well as coughing and difficulty breathing. And higher levels can cause shock, convulsions, coma, and death. And I know that residents who live around the refinery refer often to symptoms such as headaches, nosebleeds, throat, nausea, dizziness, etc. And I'm wondering what it is you're measuring, and perhaps the constant 24 hours, 7-day-a-week low-level emissions are taking its toll on our residents. And for people who have the opportunity to come into work at 8 and leave at 6, may not, or who might work overnight for 8 hours or 9 hours, might not necessarily have the same effects that people who actually live in the area and breathe it constantly have.
Brian, do you want to take some of that question? Maybe I'll just lead in with a couple of things. First thing is hydrogen sulfide, for instance, that you described there. We often report H2S, hydrogen sulfide, as being exceeded. What that actually is, it's exceeded within our flare pipe. Hydrogen sulfide then is burnt at the tip to make SO2 and water. So when you see an exceedance for hydrogen sulfide, it doesn't necessarily mean hydrogen sulfide was emitted. It means it was above the level required in the flare before it was burnt to SO2 and water. But Brian, there were some questions in there about levels, exposure. Do you maybe want to take these for me?
Yeah, Donald. So as I mentioned earlier, the meters that we have on hand and that we're able to take out in the field when there's an event measure to the part per million level. And so for hydrogen sulfide in particular, we're looking for anything that's over 0.1 parts per million. So if we get readings, sustained readings above that, that's where we'll report that in and take action. On the sulfur dioxide, again, reading at the parts per million level, We're looking for anything over 0.3 parts per million is the value that we would look for and want to take action on. Again, those are not, I know that those are not as low as what the CDPHE air monitors have out in the north of the refinery and or southwest of the refinery. Those are measuring in parts per billion. I don't believe they have H2S sensors on their stations, but they do have SO2, if I'm not mistaken.
Because I've been in the office building at Suncor, and when the doors and the door is closed, the air is very fresh inside the building. So there must be a pretty good air purifying system in the building.
I can't speak to it. I don't think there's anything special. I think it's a regular air handling unit on the building. So.
Thank you.
Councilman Hurst.
Any other questions?
Councilman Hurst.
Thank you. Sorry, I thought I heard that, but I wasn't sure. To go back to the partnership, how we could potentially partnership. Right now, there's an active project that the governor is going to speak about tomorrow. It's called a sector partnership workforce development. I know that CDOT is playing a role in that from the transportation standpoint, but it's through the Colorado Workforce Development Center, which is also a state agency, and it is focused on trades and all the different types of transportation, all the different types of trades. It is a educational opportunity, but it's really supported by the state government, ran by the industry, meaning the champions and the breakdowns of specific parts of the program will be ran by an industry champion, maybe an HR representative from a company in the area. And I know that the intent is to allow for at the county level being able to reach out to those folks, the kids, the students that you were discussing individually. So I'm sure Adams County in their process through working with CWDC will be able to help Suncor or partner with Suncor. And obviously you guys have specific needs for your workforce with engineering pipe fitters, and there's some cross training available to other facets of the industry. They don't just have to work for Suncor, but I think connecting with that CWDC for the sector partnership, you can really focus on engineering and job creation of the type of focus that you're focused on, and we can help work with the university system in Colorado, not only School of Mines, but just the rest of the university, including some of the community colleges, to try to develop programs like this that could really enhance the workforce of the future for us. And that could be in a lot of different ways, right? We're talking about electrification of the transportation system. That doesn't happen organically without having people who can work on an electric car, who can work on the electric charging stations. So you have to have that workforce, and that the Workforce Development Council or Center is focused on doing. And so that might be a good opportunity for us to work together and try to come up with a solution there.
Yeah, definitely. So I think I know we're taking notes. I think that it would be a program for us to definitely explore, talk with the government about, and understand how we can get involved so that we can, really be able to provide good paying jobs to people who are qualified and want to work for the refinery that are local to this area. I mean, that helps in all different ways, but just to have the retention of that person long term for a career is one of the first benefits that I can see, right?
Yeah, I just think there's opportunity to discuss a wide variety of professions that are associated with not just the refinery, but just the support businesses and everything else that goes along into it. So like you said, welding, pipe fitting, those are used in other industries as well, but it's a good input to the trades conversation and what the goal of that project is to do. So I think there's good.
Yep, thank you.
Councilwoman Ellen Thomas.
Yes, thank you. I just had a few other questions on this area. I think it's great that, Suncor is encouraging a long-term career there, but I'm just curious. I've lived in Commerce City my entire life, and I'm less than 3 miles from the refinery and experienced some of the health potentials. And I know several other residents in the area that have experienced health concerns and other issues. So does Suncor continuously monitor health issues with their employees? And is there a medical team on site for the staff?
We do have a medical surveillance program, and we do have a health center with a registered nurse on there full time. It's Brian Nelson's area, so I'll turn it over to Brian to elaborate on that.
Yeah, April. Yeah, just as you said, we do have a full-time occupational health nurse on staff, which has access to doctors and stuff to support our personnel. But they provide first aid, initial injury treatment for minor injuries and stuff at work, whether it's employees or contractors. But then they do ongoing medical surveillance as well for the employees as well, and including our emergency response team, right, which is almost equivalent to a local fire department. Actually is a registered fire department with the state, and does the annual medical surveillance physicals for those individuals as well, plus people for the respiratory protection program, hearing conservation program, vision checks, all those types of things.
Okay, so throughout their career, do you guys track any type of diseases or anything has anything been traced from the employees actually working on that site? Like I said, because I'm less than 3 miles away, so I'd like to know, is anything reported currently within that site, or high incidences of anything from working at Suncor?
Not to my knowledge, no.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Are there any other questions from council regarding this? Please proceed.
Okay, thank you for your time.
Thank you, April. If we maybe could move to the next slide. And the next couple of slides really talk to some of the questions we had around the settlement that was reached in March of this year. So let me just remind people what that was. There was 3 parts to the settlement in terms of penalties of 1.4 million, community project SEPs, and also a requirement to invest 5 million in improvement projects that would come from a third-party review. In addition to that, there was the third-party review. There was also funding for cyanide monitoring, hydrogen cyanide monitoring that will be conducted by CDPHE, and also a look at how we improve consultation and communication with the community around the refinery. So these were the key areas that we covered. If we could move to the next slide just for 1 minute. One of the questions we got was around the third party. Who are they? A company by the name of Kearney has been brought in. They have quite vast experience in the industry, as you can see here, around the world, and very knowledgeable and respected company for doing this type of work. We asked them to look at, or have a look at the causes of the emissions exceedances, make recommendations in terms of design, operation, maintenance practices. They started that work back in July. They are almost at the point of completion now. They're in the phase of putting together the draft report. That will be shared shortly with CDPHE and taken from there. But we had a deadline in March 31st, and I think we're going to be done this work by the end of the year. So should have more to report on that once we've gone through the final steps of that process. So just wanted to remind people what was in the compliance order, what we're doing about it, and happy to take any questions there. Maybe then if we move to the next slide, we maybe talk a little bit about the last piece of that compliance order, which is about community consultation, communication processes, and to Councilwoman Noble's original question, what can we do and what are we hearing here and what are we thinking about and improving? Maybe Alicia, if I could hand that over to you to take us through this.
Absolutely. Thanks, Donald. And hopefully everybody can hear me. So as Donald mentioned, the third component was the commitment that we made to do a very robust and thorough stakeholder and community consultation, we're calling it a project. And we have been sort of keeping the council and staff up to date on the planning of that. And so I would say from about May through about August, we were in the process of doing a very thorough and complete planning and how we were going to implement the third-party consultation that we did with a research partner. We brought in someone who has expertise in doing research of this sort and polling with a broad community. And from August through October, we've actually been implementing that community consultation process and project. And so really, I wanted to first just express my thanks to the mayor and to all the city council members for the feedback that you've been giving to us as we've provided updates in our planning, but also most recently thanking those that spent a lot of time with us. We really appreciate you, one, spending time with us to give us your direct thoughts, spending one-on-one time with us with your input, your ideas, and your feedback, but also we really appreciate you sharing the survey opportunity with your constituents. And also just want to thank the city staff for helping us share the information broadly through your own channels, communication channels. So thanks so much, and know that we are taking all of that data in. Let me just give you an update on where we're at. So again, as I mentioned, August through October, we've been having lots of one-on-one communications with stakeholders. On September 9th, we actually launched two phases of the survey. One was online and one was via telephone, both in English and Spanish. We completed 600 telephone surveys, and the online survey will remain open and through November 1st. And we've also held 8 community focus groups, as well as some employee focus groups. And so again, the intent of this feedback through the community and stakeholder consultation process is to actually use that data, absorb the data, to then inform so that we can take some action. So what are we going to do to improve our tools? What systems do we need? What technologies do we need? Based on what we're hearing from the community members on what they would like to see done, back to the question at the very beginning of this session, to enable us to share data, the right kind of data in the right tools, in the right mediums to meet the community's needs, and to do that in an automated way, in a technologically advanced way, and in a timely way. So since April, we've also been working in parallel piece of work with the cross-functional team to understand what are those technologies so that we can take the survey data, take the technologies that we may want to implement, and see where those marry up. So our next steps will be, we will be seeing the data from our third-party research firm at the beginning of November, and we're going to take some time to understand it, absorb it, compile it, analyze it. We might have to go back out and validate what we heard back to the community, and then we'll be compiling that in the report that we present to CDPH&E. And then we'll ultimately be looking at that to determine what actions we need to take. Just a couple of comments on the data that we're going to be receiving from the partner that helped us complete and execute the survey. We're working to determine how we will share all those results. I know in many of the conversations that we had with this council that you asked how we would be sharing it, and we do intend to share it. We just need to understand what the data looks like so we can find the right format and then find the right avenue in which to share it. And then if you could just go to the next slide, I'll just give a quick update on some of the timelines that we're working against. So as I mentioned, we'll be sending a report to CDPH&E. In that report will be the findings and data and survey information from the community consultation project that we completed. More importantly, we'll be including along with that data and what we heard from the community, the short-term proposed measures and the long-term proposed measures in terms of how we're going to improve how we notify, share data, and communicate with the community in a variety of different scenarios. We'll also be working to meet the requirements of House Bill 1265. So this is the piece that relates to reverse 911 in certain types of scenarios. Those requirements take effect on January 2nd of 2021. And then by March 30th and then September 30th of next year are the implementation deadlines for the agreed upon short-term measures and long-term measures from the settlement agreement. And again, we are really excited to get the data back from the community consultation project and the survey. We are wanting to look at that data and really understand it to ensure that we use it to inform the actions that we'll take. And we actually look forward to working with council and the mayor and staff on how we can collaborate and share with you the data so that we are taking the right actions.
Alicia, would it be fair to say that that feedback is invaluable for us to how we make use of additional tools like microsites, things like Everbridge, reverse 911, because we suspect the answer is not one of these, but maybe a number of these.
Absolutely, Donald. Again, the survey feedback will really give us an indication of what the community is looking for. And it's not just a one size fits all. It's going to be a combination of some tools, whether it be an Everbridge type of system, emergency notification system, our website that we're putting together, other tools that we may have, a notification system off of the microsite. So texting, automated phone calls, so similar to other technologies that we have access to. It's a matter of just knitting together what the community is asking for in what types of scenarios and how we can provide that service through the right platform quickly, efficiently, and to meet the needs of the community.
And I think it would be fair to say, Alicia, one of the big things in there is using that technology to get that information quicker into the community.
Absolutely, and in the languages that we need to provide it in.
Thank you. Any questions for us there?
Councilwoman Noble.
Interestingly, I just had to update my contact information with my bank today because, of course, if there's any credit card fraud or any odd use on it, they contact me immediately. So these things don't have to be reinvented. You know, they exist and it happens everywhere. So I'm glad you're working on it, but the fact that you haven't done this on your own initiative is actually very concerning. My other concern is that since the plants have been not in the same rate of use this year because of COVID as they are in prior years, because you have 2 plants down now, because you've had plant 2 down at some points during the last 8 months, why would the investigation by the outside company be truncated when you haven't been fully operational for these entire 8 months to really investigate where the air issues are, where the problems are, et cetera?
So although that period of time was through July through to now, they've been looking at data that goes way before that. They've been looking at data that's over years. So they were here during that period, but the span of the work they've done is way beyond just these few months.
And CDPHE is working with you also on the PFAS issues at Suncor. Are they looking into whether it's your pipes that are leaking into groundwater? I know that your permit is going to be predicated next year on what steps you take to contain the forever chemicals, which are oftentimes toxic, that are in the groundwater around Suncor.
The PFOS and P4 that you talk to, these forever chemicals, were present not in what we make, but in the fire foams that we've used in incidents over the years. So they were present in firefighting foams. One of the things we've done is we've changed out our firefighting foam such it doesn't have any of the compounds that are causing concern. So that was updated last year. We've been taking groundwater samples to understand where this contamination is, and we're working on how we can ensure that we keep that within the refinery. So there's work going on there, and we're working with CDP in it. But it's not in what we make, it's actually was contained in the firefighting foams that were used over a long period of time. Because one of the things we had in the refinery was a firefighting ground where we practiced with these for many years, not knowing the impact. Now we've changed the foams and we've changed the way in which we do our training. And Brian, maybe you'd want to speak to that, just the changes we've made there.
Yeah, so last year we bought all new foam for the refinery to help combat or use for the hazards that we may face or encounter. And then the other foam is we still have it on site, but we're working to dispose of it appropriately. And so we participate. I mentioned earlier that we're a registered fire department with the state, and so the state, has been sending out surveys across all fire departments across the state, and we participated in that data collection effort just as other fire departments had as well.
And Brian, what were the parts per trillion of PFAS that were found at Suncor?
I don't know the number. I don't recall the number straight off the top of my head, Susan.
Okay, and did any of this travel into the creek that we discussed earlier?
We do have sampling data that was provided to CDPHE that did show that there were some PFAS or PFAS chemicals that they asked us to sample for in our outfall that would go into Sand Creek. We also provided them data that does show that there are some background levels of PFAS that appear to be in Sand Creek and maybe in the Platte River as well, too, outside of the refinery.
And Brian, would it be fair to say that these are upstream of the refinery as well, where we've seen background levels?
Yes.
Why would that be important, Mr. Austin?
It's just that some of the water coming to the refinery before we discharge has background levels that are high already.
Well, you would have to know the PPT going in and coming out in order for that to be relevant information. It would be interesting to know. If you can share that, that would be important.
I think that's information, Brian. We have water prior to coming to, so before our discharge. So, yep, and we have shared that.
With us?
We can get you a copy of that if you need it. Yeah. I mean,
okay.
Brian, am I right to say
Thank you.
we've shared that with CDPHE? Is that a fair comment?
Yes, that is correct.
Councilman Hurst.
Just to notate on that, the PFAS, it's been a very hot topic item nationwide, not just in Colorado, but Colorado obviously has some facilities, including Rocky Mountain Arsenal, including Fort Carson and the military installations that have traditionally been firefighting, and DIA as well, firefighting training facilities that are on site on a lot of these locations. I was looking up to see if I could find the bill number, but Senator Fenberg and Lee both ran a bill this year that was passed that actually takes a service charge for every load of fuel delivered to a gas station. So at delivery point, and they charge that that transport company $100 fee And I think half of that fee goes to PFAS cleanup money to CDPHE. Please don't quote me on exactly half. It's roughly in that area of half of that fee goes towards the cleanup of PFAS. And so there's going to be a fund for the next 5 years, I think is how the bill is written. And obviously there's options to extend. But over the next 5 years, there will be money to help. I don't know if it's to identify or actually do remediation, but those PFAS has definitely, PFAS and PFOA have definitely become a significant focus for the state in cleaning up water resources.
Councilwoman Allen Thomas.
Yes, thank you. So I'm just trying to make sure I understood correctly. So does your water treatment plant take out the PFAS and the PFOs before returning it back to the river?
Brian, do you want to comment on that, where we are today and where we need to be in the future?
Yeah, so there are times, I don't know what the exact level is going to be in the Water Quality Control Commission and the permits for the state, but I know the health advisor from the EPA was set at 70 parts per trillion for PFOA, PFOA, and PFOS compounds. And so there are times when we have sampled our discharge water from our wastewater treatment plant where we've been above that, but there are times that we have been below that as well. So it's not a consistent level. It does vary and fluctuate a little bit. So we are going to have to take likely have to take some action to work with that based on the permitting requirements and the rules and stuff that Colorado is working on.
Okay. So you said take some action right now. You're not doing anything about it yet then? Or what type of action do you plan on taking?
What we're looking at the moment is installing additional equipment to take this out. So we've taken the engineering steps. Now we need to go and install it. And one of the things we need to know is what is the level it's to be reduced to? And that's a piece of information that will allow us to finish that and then complete the project.
Okay, so, and do you know why it's taking so long then?
Really, it's only because we've only become aware of the issue recently and trying to identify and measure to that, and then find technologies that will work to reduce it. In the main at the moment, Brian, we're looking at carbon canister type treatment of that, and maybe you could explain to people what that does.
Yeah, to our, we believe the most viable technology right now is carbon canister. And so that's passing water that after it's gone through all of our wastewater treatment plant, it's going through a final step where it goes through additional carbon filters before it would be discharged. And so, you know, those carbon filters can remove so much, and then they'll have to be, you know, monitored and changed out at some interval. But I think, as Donald alluded to, very important to know what that level you're targeting to, so you can make sure you have the right size equipment and everything to do what's needed.
Yeah.
And I think also part of the reason for raising that money is to find even better technology than that. And some of it's going into research is what I think we're raising money for PFOA and PFOS.
Right.
So is there an estimated time then when you may have this equipment, or how long do we have to wait?
I think April, can you help us with the project timelines?
Yeah, so we have this project identified in our portfolio, and so it's one of the projects in that $300 million that I said we would be spending over the next 3 years. It is one of the projects in there. We've already got the conceptual engineering design is done, so that's on paper saying this is what we need to do. What we're really waiting for is the regulation to be set so that we know what our target is. What do we actually have to get to so that we can size the equipment appropriately, and really finish the detailed portions of the design and then construction. So we need to know what our objective is, what our target is before we can finish the project.
Okay, so you probably won't know then the target date you're saying till maybe like around January when
Yeah, is that when the permit will be set, or?
Like when will you know? Or
Well, is it going to be 70 parts per trillion? Is it going to be trace amounts? Is it going to be 35 parts per trillion? So I mean, it's just what is the target that we have to go after? And I'm not sure about the January timeframe. I'm not in the permitting process. So
Okay, all right. So do you have a target date then set? You know, from today?
So the minute we know that level, then we'll go to start building and purchasing the equipment to do that. We're kind of held there till we've got that. Once we know that, then we'll be able to give you a better time scale. It's so we know how low we've to go in PFOS and P4. It's difficult to answer your question.
Okay, thank you.
Donald, it's Heather. Can I just add something else?
Absolutely.
Yeah, Donald, one other thing maybe folks should just help remind folks is that we'll also take a two-stage approach to this, where a project may take us some time to engineer and design a permanent sort of installation. We're also looking at transitional temporary sort of means to do it in the interim as well, knowing that it will take time. And to the Councilwoman's question, knowing that if there's technologies and opportunity, we would take that opportunity to do something more quickly. And we'll be working through both of those in parallel.
Are there any other questions at this time? Mr. Rogers?
Thank you, Mayor. If there are no other further questions, I want to be able to say thank you to Suncor for their presentation tonight. Obviously, they've been working with staff in response to your number of questions. I would also like to thank CDPHE, in particular John Putnam, who was also available tonight, who is their director for environmental programs. I would like to share with you, obviously there's a lot of information and a lot of responses provided tonight, that as you have questions going forward, please feel free to reach out to me and rest of staff. Obviously we are staying actively engaged with both parties, and we'll try to get you the answers as timely as we possibly can. So just wanted to share that with you, Mayor, and the rest of council, that as things do come up, additional questions come up based off of the information today, we will make sure to make those connections and to get those responses to you.
Thank you, sir. We appreciate that. And thank you, everybody, for your time this evening, for the wonderful information that you provided. Next on the agenda is a presentation on maximum fees for third-party food delivery services. Well, Michelle Claymore, Director of Economic Development, please make the presentation.
There's frozen yogurt.
No.
There's
Michelle, you should be able to unmute yourself, and I'm ready to start the presentation when you are.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor and honorable council members. Tonight we are bringing forward a request that was initiated by the Colorado Restaurant Association regarding placing a temporary cap on the commissions charged for restaurants by third-party delivery app companies as a way to provide some financial relief to restaurant owners during the COVID-19 pandemic. I apologize, my camera is not working very well tonight. Go ahead and bring up the presentation, please, Dylan. Give me just a sec here. Okay. So the National Restaurant Association estimates that COVID-19 pandemic will result in about $225 billion in lost revenue to restaurants and the elimination of 5 to 7 million jobs. Commerce City has over 80 restaurants and they are struggling. Many may not make it through the coming winter months. The COVID pandemic has contributed to a multitude of issues, including lack of customer confidence and limited in-person dining capacities through state health orders. This will be an even bigger issue as Adams County goes into a safer at home level 3 response this coming Wednesday evening, which will limit in-dining capacity even more. That's to 25%. When COVID began, some restaurants chose to utilize third-party delivery app companies to try and increase business through food delivery. However, restaurant owners have shared that rising fees and commissions from these companies are turning off a lot of customers, and restaurants are still experiencing shrinking revenues and may not be able to survive the pandemic. Next slide, please. This is a timeline showing the various capacity regulations that were put on restaurants and bars so far during the pandemic. So all restaurants are ordered to close their dining rooms on March 16th, and they remain closed until June 19th. At this time, the CDPHE allowed restaurants to reopen their dining rooms at 50% their normal capacity. CDPHE began the dial or county tiered system on September 15th, and on October 28th, due to rising COVID cases, Adams County will be at a safer at home level 3 tier, which further limits to dining capacity from 50 to 25%, as I said earlier. We are also moving into the months with cooler temperatures, so restaurants will rely on delivery and takeout orders more as temperatures start dropping. Next slide, please. Thank you, Dylan. In addition to declining revenues, these are some of the other issues that our restaurants are facing since the COVID pandemic began in March. Next slide. With all of these issues and declining revenues, restaurant owners are looking to increase food delivery service. They can set up their own delivery service, or they can choose a third-party delivery app company like DoorDash, Uber Eats, Grubhub, or Postmates. A report from eMarketer said that 40 million Americans used a food delivery app in 2019. That number has likely risen exponentially in the past few months due to the coronavirus pandemic. This slide kind of shows some positives and some cons to bringing a delivery service in-house versus using one of these third-party apps. There are many advantages to using the third-party delivery apps, such as strong brand awareness, especially among millennials who want the convenience of a quick online ordering system. Next slide, please. When it comes to the various fees to use a third-party delivery app company, it varies from company to company, and it really isn't that transparent. Based on information we found from various online reports, this is typically how we believe the fees work. So if you put in an order using one of these third-party apps, the customer pays a delivery fee, which is usually between $5 and $10 per order. The customer, on top of that, has the choice to pay a tip to the driver, typically between 15 and 20%, which is a regular service fee. Restaurants pay up to 15 to 35% of that total order as a commission for each order. The restaurant may also pay additional fees for online marketing support. So say if they use one of these companies, they might pay an additional fee to have that company push out ads about that restaurant, have them show up on maps, do various things like that. And then the platform itself, or the company, pays the driver, pays for the driver background check, and then all of the app technology. And typically, the only report that I saw what a driver would earn is one of the companies was paying $1 per delivery plus 100% of the tip. But the driver has to provide their own vehicle and is responsible for their own expenses, for gas, insurance, their phone, etc. Next slide, please. So the Colorado Restaurant Association, restaurant owners, and other industry supporters have expressed a growing concern with the business practice of some of these companies that are affecting our restaurants who are trying to survive during the pandemic. They shared that once commission fees are over 25%, it is no longer profitable for the restaurants to offer delivery services. According to an online report on this topic, a restaurant owner posted his business payout report from one of these third-party app companies on his Facebook page last March, and it went viral. He said that out of $1,000, it was $1,042 in sales for the month, the third-party delivery company only gave to him $376 and said that the rest was to cover commissions, delivery commissions, processing fees, and promotions. Now, we asked several of our restaurants in Commerce City, and those we heard back from generally supported a temporary cap. Atalante's board also supports it and shared an example of how one of our food trucks tested out a third-party delivery fee. They had a customer order from the third-party app, and the order totaled $80 with a 90-minute delivery time. The same order in person was $32 with about a 10-minute wait time. So these are the type of fees that are getting charged on top of a regular fee for a restaurant providing food to a customer. Next slide, please. Now, other communities across the country have or are considering placing a temporary cap on third-party delivery fees to better support their local restaurants during the COVID pandemic. Along the Front Range, we are aware of at least 3 communities looking at this issue. Denver has already passed a fee, I believe at the 15%. Next slide. If you would like to do the same in Commerce City, staff is suggesting a similar cap of 15% on the delivery commission fee paid by the restaurant to start immediately and to go through March 31st, 2021, or when restaurants are able to return to 100% capacity for in-dining services, whichever comes first. We would ask the flexibility to have council extend this time frame if needed. We would also recommend adding some driver protection by ensuring that 100% of the tips given by customers to the driver actually go to the driver. And then we are also asking that the delivery app companies be required to have total billing transparencies and disclose and break down all charges, fees, and commissions paid by customers. Next slide, please. This temporary fee cap will allow restaurants to retain a higher percentage of revenues from sales on delivered food during the pandemic. We also think that it may provide restaurants that are not currently able to afford third-party delivery services the opportunity to do so during the pandemic as a way to temporarily increase sales. Next slide. Now, we realize enforcement on this will be a little tough, but we will send a letter to all third-party delivery app companies that we are aware are providing services within the city, informing them of the ordinance if it is passed by council. The city will also create an online intake form for submissions of potential violations, which we will try and address with the identified companies. Next slide, please. And so with that, I would welcome questions or discussion and would ask for a sense on whether council would like to move forward with a proposed ordinance. Any questions?
Mayor Huseman, I believe you're on mute.
Councilman Hurst.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. So when I read this last night when I was doing my studying, I have to admit, by the title, it'd usually be something I would stand against and say, let the market figure this out. I don't think that's the right move in this situation. I did look at other places, and yeah, Denver's doing it. A lot of other places are doing it. My biggest concern going into this was, how is it enforceable? And I'm not sure it's more enforceable than a reputation stain for those that don't comply. So I support it, and I'll continue to support it. I like the 15%. Seems to be, I've seen a couple of variations last night when I was looking for them, because once I saw the 15%, I saw it several times in a row. But then a couple one-off variations, and maybe I guess my biggest thing would be definitely support a temporary look at this. But in that, when I say temporary, if there's more opportunity, if we get feedback to consider from the companies and then feedback from the restaurants on a better solution, I would obviously like to reserve the flexibility for us to, if the market comes up with something that supports both sides better, be able to look at that and take action. But yes, I support 15%. I think we just need to define when that goes away. Some of the stories I read last night showed when restaurants became allowed to eat outside again, these companies considered that as a removal of this regulation. And so I think we just need to clearly define what those hit points are. Is it 100% back sitting in restaurants before they can go back to kind of the free market solution, or is it 75%? Really trying to define, what is the trigger that removes this regulation, I think might help us defeat any issues in the future with this. Be the feedback that I got kind of from reading about how their cities have dealt with this.
Thank you.
Councilwoman Noble.
I like this. Thank you so much for bringing it forward. This would be really great. The restaurants that we use actually have delivery, so that's been convenient. And I must say, if I had to pay any of those extra fees, or my husband did, we probably would not be buying for that restaurant. So if it means that people are making more use of these restaurants, then it's achieving the end that we want, which is to support our local businesses. So thanks again for bringing it forward. I will certainly support it.
Thank you.
Councilman Madera.
Yeah, I'm supportive of this. I've used these DoorDash and Grubhub and a lot of these different apps a lot. And what I've noticed, recently is a lot of our Commerce City restaurants have started falling off of these lists. So, they've gotten shorter and shorter recently, and it's because of these fees. And I think, normally I wouldn't be supportive of this, but being that, just what I'm seeing from our local businesses, trying to stay afloat and, almost being price gouged by something that they've implemented to try to help them to survive. And, just seeing some of our regional cities doing the same thing, it would be difficult for to pass this and then have Denver, have no cap. But since Denver and Aurora are on board, I'm definitely supportive of this, and I hope that helps our restaurants to survive through this.
Any other questions or comments for staff? Okay, seeing no other questions, thank you for your time and your presentation.
Thank you, Mayor.
Next on the agenda is the 2020-2021 Snow and Ice Control Plan update. Will Willis Waterhouse Parks and Streets Operations Manager please give the presentation?
Willie, you should be able to unmute yourself, and I'm ready to start the presentation whenever you are.
Okay, you can go ahead and start the presentation. Good evening, Mayor and members of council. Okay, there we go. So we're here to talk about the current snow plan for this year, and really it has not a lot of changes since this presentation last year, so it should be a fairly brief overview. But tonight we're going to talk about the Snow and Ice Control Program goals, the priority street and storm classification designations, our performance goals, the team resources that we have available to us, the staff training that we provide, communications that are provided both internally and externally, what citizens' responsibilities are, and then talk about the continuance of some of the practices that were implemented last year for the 2019 and 2020 season, as well as touch on the emergency snow plan. Next slide, please. So the overall program goals for the snow and ice removal program is to provide fiscally responsible service during snow and ice events that support the safety and mobility of the city's transportation system by removing or displacing snow and ice from all designated priority streets, parking areas, trails, and city maintained sidewalks as safely as possible. Next slide. So these are our priority street classifications. Priority ones are comprised of our major arterials that connect us to hospitals, fire and police stations, and other emergency units. Priority twos are the remaining arterials throughout the city and selected collectors that complete the network overall, providing access to schools and other facilities. Priority threes are all the remaining collectors to include bus routes and other hilly areas that might need additional service. And then priority fours are our residential or our low volume streets. And these are plowed only when snow accumulations completely block traffic per the emergency snow operations plan. Next slide, please. So this is a overall map of our districts throughout the city. So we have 8 different districts that our plow operators remain in for the most part while they're out on their shifts. You can take a look at the overall grid network that kind of backs up the last slide with the priority designations. Priority 1s are the red routes that provide the big overall grid. Priority 2s are the green streets there that obviously they dive into the neighborhoods and connect all the way through the neighborhoods and provide those collector streets. And priority 3s are kind of few and far between. There's not a ton of those spread throughout the city, but those are listed in yellow there. Next slide, please. So storm classifications, we classify storms as 3 different categories. So class 1 is a storm that is anticipated to last less than 12 hours and or drop 4 or less inches of snow. A class 2 storm would be a storm that's predicted to last 12 hours or longer and has 4 to 8 inches of snow predicted. And a class 3 storm would be a storm that's predicted for 24 or more hours and is predicted to drop 8 or more inches of snow throughout its duration. Next slide. So we use those classifications to help us meet these performance goals and how we determine how we attack a storm. So during a class 1 storm, our performance goals are to clear the snow from all travel lanes of priority 1 and priority 2 streets initially, and then provide at least 1 passable travel lane on priority 3 streets during the duration of that storm. The class 2 storm, during the storm event, we're going to plan to clear all snow from the travel lanes of priority 1 and priority 2 streets. And then after the storm, or as time allows, we will clear the remaining lanes of priority 3 streets. On a class 3 storms, during the storm event, we're going to maintain just trying to get 1 lane passable at a minimum on all of our priority 1 streets. So we'll stay on those priority 1s to keep the grid network open. And as time allows and we get sufficient clearing, we'll then move into travel lanes for priority 2 streets. And then further down the line, as time allows, we'll get into the priority 3 streets. Next slide. So this is what our team resources look like. This is a joint response program between parks and streets. They are 14 tandem sized class B CDL plow and sander units, 4 1-ton trucks with plows and sanders in the streets division, a loader, a backhoe, and a motor grader. Parks has 7 1-ton trucks with plows and sanders that are used primarily on trails, parking lots, city facilities, but can supplement out on the roadways as necessary. 4 1-ton trucks with plows, no sanders. 4 small pickup, like Ranger size style pickups with plows, no sanders on those as well. 5 small snow units that are mowers that we convert over. They're mowers used throughout the summer, and then they're converted with a plow and cab conversion kit. 1 skid steer, 1 small tractor. And then the staff that we have within the streets department is 19 full-time street staff, 2 of which are our maintenance supervisors. Those maintenance supervisors will be the acting crew chiefs during snow operations, 1 for day crew and 1 for night crew. And then 13 full-time park staff members, which includes 2 maintenance supervisors there who are also crew chiefs for the parks side of the operation. And we typically have 5 variable hour staff members on staff who typically do not have a CDL and are not subject to operating the tandem sized vehicles out on the roadway. Luckily this year we have a few additional staff that are still on board with us because we had a fairly substantial amount of staff out this weekend for leave and other instances from COVID related preventative measures essentially. So we were able to get through the storm this weekend. We had a few extra folks there that helped us get through that yesterday and this morning. So next slide, please. So our tandem axle size fleet, this would encompass actually tandem vehicles and single axle vehicles that are class B plow and sander units. 7 of those units are 2016 or newer. And we have 4 additional units that are requested for replacement in 2021 That will get us to 11 newer units, with 3 of the older units still kind of remaining in inventory for backup or for extra use in those class 3 storms or bigger blizzard type instances as needed. Next slide, please. The staff training that we provide for all division staff annually would encompass operating the tandem-sized plow trucks for plowing and sanding techniques, operation of the vehicles, etc. 1-ton plowing operations to include sanding techniques and use inside of smaller areas like parking lots. Small equipment plowing techniques for our lower mower type equipment, gets in and out of tight areas, up and down walkways, different areas, a little bit different techniques on some of those. Training on all streets districts for all 8 of those districts. Building and grounds park site specific training for each individual site that we are responsible for maintaining. Truck and equipment preventative maintenance and upkeep, as well as the calibrations of the sanders and the plowing apparatuses. And then assorted additional safety trainings that would include slip, trips, and fall trainings, shovel trainings, back safety, winter prevention, or winter preparedness, etc. So, next slide. So those of you who might be familiar with Snow Trooper and may have went to check on it this morning, unfortunately, yesterday when we went to activate it, it was not functional. We sent a request ticket in, and this morning we were informed that our vendor that performs the maintenance of this web utility is no longer going to be providing service. They have handed us off as of this morning, unfortunately, to the new company who will be providing the service. So we are actively working on that starting today. We've contacted Verizon to come out and recalibrate their equipment, reset it up to send the telemetric updates to the correct server. And we have to work through a new contract and also through getting all of our GIS data uploaded and calibrated onto the new parties or the new provider's system. Estimated timeline for that to be back up and running is 1 to 2 weeks. So we're pushing aggressively to try to get that at that 1 week. Hopefully that's back up before we get any more snow events. What you would normally see on this website though is
They tried to activate it this morning and it wasn't working.
a list of the
Snow Trooper, where you're supposed to be able to track the snow plows.
Excuse me, sir. What you would normally see on this website would be a list of the priority street designations. So you can go and look and see what priority 1s, 2s, and 3s are in your area or across the city. And then also on a different tab, it would show the activity of plow trucks, how recently they've been up and down each one of those routes. So that again should be functional within the next week or 2 with the new provider. Unfortunately, we can't show a demo today because it's down. So next slide, please. So all the different communications that the city provides out to internal communications for staff would include news and views, employee newsletter articles that would cover information from the weather hotline that provides reminders out to staff about how to get a hold of the city for those different reminders. Winter weather tips, different blurbs about winter safety. Intranet news posts, internal information hotline is updated to allow staff to call in ahead of time to check on facility closures, delays, those types of events that are related to the winter weather events. Next slide, please. The community relations also controls the external communications that go out through Commerce City Connected newsletter articles. Those would typically feature Snow Trooper app, different online maps and other resources the city has on the website. Social media posts that would go out through Facebook, Nextdoor, etc. Website news flashes and alerts. They can put up ticker style alerts on the main web page as necessary. And then we have an external emergency weather hotline as well. So citizens can check to see if the city's on delay or court is operating that day and whatnot. Next slide, please. So citizens also share responsibility in the cleanup of the snow and ice control throughout the city. So those are listed in Commerce City Code of Ordinances, section 6-2013 under the unsafe sidewalks and rights of way. Item B, snow and ice, would would dictate that snow removals for sleet, hail, ice from sidewalks must occur within 24 hours of the last accumulation. Citizens cannot dump or deposit snow from private property onto public property or neighboring property. And they cannot deposit or dump snow against fire hydrants or traffic control devices. Next slide, please. So in 2019, 2020 snow season, we implemented some new practices and philosophies. One of those is a staff rotation philosophy, which places emphasis on training and rotation through all the districts to increase the driver's autonomy and adaptability and flexibility when we get into situations where they're potentially put in a district that they're not intimately familiar with. We improved our call out process. It's more proactive now and requires us to self-monitor and call out. So our supervisors are able to dispatch themselves and their crews. In the past, we have probably relied on too much of waiting for the PD to call us out. Unfortunately, even if the PD is able to call us immediately when snow starts falling, it takes about an hour for crews to get the call, respond, get to the shop, and then get out on the road. So even if they call us at that time, we've lost an hour from the initial call, but PD's often overwhelmed and has other issues going on at those times. So sometimes those calls were delayed as well. So we're really targeting a proactive approach about getting out on the street and doing early responses and preventative, getting out there ahead of the storm. Next slide, please. Last year, we also purchased an additional 30 Type 3 barricades. Those will help us to shut down roads and be able to deploy them rapidly if needed. We also will stage them at locations that were known or anticipate to have issues with snow blowing over the roadways and whatnot. Last year, we were fortunate enough to not have to close down roadways due to any of the snow activity that we had, and we had some rather large storms with lots of blowing wind. Some of the increased practices of increasing the number of snow units out on the streets at one time, and some of the other plowing techniques that we've implemented that we believe kept us ahead of the game and did not have to shut those down. So that's definitely the target to keep that in mind and keep that our goal moving forward. We increased the use of echelon plowing or team plowing. So the number of trucks that we utilize in each storm, we will be putting out more trucks typically on the road than we have districts. So we have 8 districts. We would typically target 10 or 11 trucks on the road to be able to tag team up and down our major corridors like 104th Avenue, 120th, Quebec Parkway, Highway 2, those bigger, wider road sections, so we can get out and knock out multiple lanes at one shot and get down and be a little more effective in our plowing techniques. Next slide, please. The emergency snow plan is a separate plan that resides primarily through the EOC's oversight. We updated that in 2019. No revisions were required for 2020-2021 season. The new title of that plan is called the Severe Winter Weather Extreme Cold Operations Plan. It was updated based on a bunch of lessons that we had learned from previous storms. The stakeholders that were involved for that update included the city manager's office, emergency manager, police department, the public works operations staff, and the communications divisions. Next slide, please. So new processes and protocols for the emergency snow plan is disseminating it to all departments annually and improving the communications and access to the plan. There's been instances in the past where we get in the middle of the storm and it wasn't necessarily widely known that that was available, or people needed to brush up on it mid-storm. So we're scheduling that to be sent out earlier in the year and prior to the need to implement it. Additionally, we are scheduling response plan meetings prior to any predicted severe winter weather events. So the EOC would call together a meeting with all of the stakeholders outlined in the plan prior to those events to eventually pre-plan and make sure that everybody's on board for the storm impending. And the plan includes a better defined list of essential personnel that calls out specific work groups and what their specific tasks might be that they would be called upon to fulfill during those timeframes. Next slide, please. And so with that, open to any questions or any comments.
Are there any questions from council regarding this presentation? Councilwoman Noble?
Great work. Thank you so much for being there. And I'm so glad that we had snow to worry about today. This was a good thing. How many crew do you have? Or how many crews or how many trucks are driving around during a snowstorm?
So during this storm, we averaged about 8 on the road. Again, like I said, we had a number of staff out due to leave and COVID kind of isolation issues. So we were a little bit short staffed this time around. We had 8 trucks for the most of the storm. During the day shift, we did increase that back to 9 when we had one individual come back from regular scheduled leave.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Councilwoman Grimes?
Thank you, Mayor. Thanks for the presentation. Lots of good information. Just wanted to ask about the link for Snow Trooper. It sends you to a page that says the certificate is expired.
Yeah, so that's the Snow Trooper app that we had mentioned that when we went to log in yesterday to activate the system, unfortunately it was not active, and so reaching out to the vendor, that's the one that
Looks like we lost Mr. Waterhouse. All right, we will move on in the agenda.
Very appropriate. He looks like he's frozen, so it's a snow. Well, never mind.
Next on the agenda is reports. Do any council members have any reports to make? Councilman Hurst?
So several of us were at the funeral on Saturday, and I just want to say, first of all, very, very touching ceremony. Amazing to see the support that is provided from the whole state. I mean, I couldn't think of an law enforcement agency that didn't have representation there. And just to focus on both the individuals that lost their lives that day, there to be able to do that was really, humbling, just to see it and be part of that. And so, but mainly I wanted to tell, Commerce City Police, that the police department, that honestly, I think we're all there for you if you need anything. I know, for speaking for myself, please let me know if there's anything I can do to help in that situation. But most of all, I wanted to say, great job on honoring somebody who's part of the family, and great planning, considering what we're living through right now, trying to get people into a stadium and comply and be safe, but still honor the lives that were lost. And so again, just want to say thank you. It was went off really well, and was just a very, very moving ceremony.
Councilwoman Noble?
Yeah.
Thank you, Councilmember Hurst. And it was inspiring to see the bond. Thank you. On other matters, first of all, there's a business recovery meeting tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. If anybody wants to be part of that. That's at Adams County, so there will be more conversation regarding what can be done for businesses with the new level 3 that we have moved to. Also, I had stopped by the police department on Friday, and I noticed that maybe the wayfinding signage could be improved from Quebec on what happens if you turn on the Parkway, what happens if you turn on, I don't know, whatever the other street is on the other side that the fire department faces. I don't go in that way, so I forget. and also signage going into the driveway and stuff. People don't necessarily know to go in the front door or the back door. And if you get to the front, the quote unquote front of the building, you can't go in that way. You have to come in on the other side. So it would be helpful if there was some signage. Also, I understand that the, I guess this would be for you, Mr. Rogers, is the Maker rent and mortgage program closed now?
Councilmember Renault. That's a great question, ma'am. Thank you for asking. We have been in contact with Maker Housing Partners. The resident portal is closed. They have shared with us that they have a number of applications in the queue, in the process, in which they will be able to meet the dollar amount that we had dispersed to them for the purposes of their rental and mortgage assistance package. So they didn't want to convey an inaccurate message and have more people sign up to which they didn't have the funds to support.
Gotcha. Yeah, I had a request from a senior today and they tried. So I just wanted to confirm that it was closed.
Yes, ma'am. I will share with you that obviously we have continued our conversations with our CDBG COVID dollars, that once we have expended the CARES Act, that we will then work on backfilling with those dollars. Now, obviously the eligibility parameters and the breadth of who we can help will be different due to federal laws and regulations on AMI, but we will still be able to put some resource out into the community after the CARES Act dollars are done.
When do you think that will happen?
I suspect, given with what we understand with the existing timeframe of the CARES Act having to return by the end of December, Maker having to close out that program for auditing purposes, I suspect probably the turn of the new year. Once again, now that's just my gut assumption, but we will work on trying to firm that up as we go forward.
Okay, thank you very much. And then lastly, this is regarding service plans. So this would be for Mr. Sheasley. And a resident who lives in Buffalo Highlands is a new mom and had been trying to go over to the park in South Lawn from Buffalo Highlands, because the developer in Buffalo Highlands who had promised a park decided that they weren't going to put in a park. But I know that some of the service plans can require a park. In this particular case, the service plan for Buffalo Highlands included only open space there by the arsenal. So what would we need to do, Mr. Sheasley, to make certain that there was always a park involved? And the reason it's important in this particular case is that the city staff came back and said that there cannot be a crosswalk, which is what the resident was looking for, across 96 because of the obvious reasons. It's a truck route, people drive too fast. So they are now trapped in Buffalo Highlands and don't have a park. And that's a really, hundreds of acres in there.
I'm not quite sure I follow your question.
What can we do in the future to make sure that all service plans call for a park?
As the council ultimately reviews any sort of metro district regulation or minimum requirements for service plans, that component of infrastructure could be something that council looks at as a thing that council wants development to deliver. I think it should be noted that service plans talk about what the developer proposes necessarily, not a requirement of approval. As far as it's more of a financing plan as opposed to a promise of particular amenities in some ways. If a development does include certain elements and says they're going to build it, then the failure to build that could be a problem. And so I think it's something that council would look at as to whether development is, and the metro district would be providing services that are needed in an area. And if they're not providing the necessary services, is something that you could look at. Not all service plans would need it. It could be a commercial or an industrial district, something without residential. And the other thing is you'll want to look at perhaps in our, I don't know how our, you don't typically review subdivisions, but I think that's where typically subdivisions would identify where parks are going to be located. Zoning, maybe not so much, but annexations and development plans, those are the sorts of things where you may lay out those requirements. So it may not be just in metro districts, it may be in a development overall.
I would like to be able to learn more about that in order to ensure that we don't move forward with any other residential projects that don't have safe access to a public park.
Yeah, I mean, Mr. Rogers at some point may be able to provide some background on that, but I know our land development code regulations do weigh in the course of development plan and subdivision approvals, private and public park locations. But I can't speak to how engineering and planning may look at access to those parks.
Okay, that's true. Or a private park. Although Reunion Park is not a private, I mean, it's maintained by the homeowners association, I guess. So that would be considered a private park then, I imagine. Right, okay. And then the other thing that I had requested, and I appreciate getting the general information, is that there are 1,500 residential either lots or homes that are next to industrial, within 300 feet of industrial in Commerce City. And I guess the question now is, when would we be able to find out which of those are simply lots that have not yet been built on, or are homes that are situated, that are already situated next to the industrial?
So Councilmember Noble, another good question. I actually do have some general information that I can share with you with respect to that. So I hope this gets to your point, but right, we have in the city 4,731 parcels that are zoned for residential. Now that's not including, I would say, our planned unit developments that you might find throughout the city. To compare that, we have 19,229 entitled residential land use parcels. Now that is assuming currently the properties that are zoned for residential and RNPD, or excuse me, are either straight zone or NAPUD, but also those that we have entitled yet have not been constructed upon. Now, I will say, now this is data that we've pulled from our systems. We are obviously routinely cleaning up that data, but from what we've been able to pull, that's what we currently have today as part of our assessment on developed and or entitled residential land in the city.
Well, in theory, we can look at a land use, one of your land use maps, one of your colorful land use maps with the lovely legend, and be able to tell where a residential area is next to an industrial area, in theory, right?
Yes, ma'am. And I would say we've also taken that step of actually looking at the land use map or the zoning map, as you stated, of properties within 300 feet, right? Once again, trying to create some consistency along the lines of adjacency or adjoining for residential to industrial land. So we do have those maps at the broader full scale of the city, and then more particular maps that zoom in to those actual areas of identified residential subdivisions throughout the city at a much more detailed level as well.
And would you be able to bring back to us at some point for a study session in the near term future, what areas are most in danger of being in this sort of conflict that really require a buffer so other residents don't find themselves in the same predicament that Bonneview has, for example?
So yes, ma'am, we do have the ability to come back and share, I say a level of different information, particularly industrial with relation to residential, obviously citywide. We would also be able to provide some other information to help support obviously the various talking points, I guess, from my standpoint, to make sure that we hit the mark. Are we just specifically looking at residential, that industrial, but are we also looking more broadly at what process or steps would be necessary to be undertaken in order to achieve or not be able to achieve certain steps with looking at a buffer? And I may not have said that as eloquent as I would like, but
That's all right. I do the same thing often, so once for you is not bad at all. That would be great. And maybe your suggestions for how we can accomplish the end goal. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Mayor.
Councilman Hurst.
Let's just understand, if we're going to go down that path, we got to understand the end goal, because depending on what we're talking about, living within 6 miles of a heavily used airport is also high risk, the same high risk as living next to an industrial zone. And 6 miles from the center of the airport is the golf course. So everything in between the airport and the golf course is still within an industrial zone. And so we won't be able to grow if we, start to talk about industrial zoning and buffers and what's appropriate, because you get down in those weeds, we already live in an industrial zone. The entire city falls inside of that.
Councilwoman Noble.
In fact, there's much that can be done, Councilmember Hurst. So it's not just limited to black and white as you're describing it. And I look forward to the discussion in the future and the ideas that the Community Development Department brings back to us. Thank you so much.
Nope, wasn't discounting that. I'm just saying we got to be careful about the direction we're going, because there's that industrial on both sides of our city. And so we just have to be aware of that and understand where all that stuff lies.
My understanding is that the airport is a commercial development, by the way.
But its pollution is industrial by nature.
Are there any other council members wishing to make a report this evening? Seeing none, I have a very brief one. I did have a Zoom conference with representatives of the 1906 company that wished to have a text amendment allowing them to store cannabis products, finished cannabis products, off-site as long as it is produced within Commerce City. That's the end of my report. That's the end of the meeting. Have a good night. Have a good week. See you next week.